What was the worst decision you saw somebody else make? I knew a guy who was supposedly recruited to be a part of the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra, not even out of high school. Then he saw his girlfriend dance with another guy at graduation, and in a fit of drunken jealousy, he punched a brick wall and shattered a dozen bones in his hand. Never played an instrument again. My cousin dropped a full-ride baseball scholarship at a college in a town he grew up in, wanting to move for a girl he started dating his senior year of high school. She was 2 years younger than him. He went to a state school instead that's 40 minutes from his hometown. She cheated on him and they broke up not long after school started. Ouch. A girl I dated for a few years broke up with me for a smack addict/dealer. I told her, "This is going to ruin your life." It's been almost 10 years and I think she's finally staying clean, but she lost a decent job and had some run-ins with the cops, plus got pregnant between stints in rehab. I witnessed my friend kick a skunk in order to get it away from him. Bad decision. I had a family of skunks that lived by my house for a long time. I moved, they're probably still there. They were always very friendly as long as you didn't get too close to the kits or act aggressively towards them. They never let me pet them or anything, but they were perfectly content to chill out on the lawn just a few feet away. And I told that to an idiot cousin who was over one day, and she apparently interpreted that to mean it was okay to try and pet one of the kits. It didn't go quite according to plan. So my fiancé's cousin was donating $50 to Thon. Thon is a fundraiser held by Penn State where they dance for hours and hours to raise money for causes like running a marathon, but dancing. He was donating to a friend and did it with coins hot glued to a cardboard backing, making a big Penn State logo. Cool looking. Well, his girlfriend decided that it was so cool looking that it should be framed. For something that was to be taken apart shortly after it was given. The dabs of glue were small and he'd engineered it to come apart easily, by the way. He was real angry when she bought that frame and they couldn't even return it because it was a custom job. So they ended up keeping it so as to not totally waste the $600, and he wrote a check for $50 for the donation. Now they have a silly framed $650 Penn State logo on their wall, and neither of them even went to Penn State. Oof, well, that was one of those well-meaning, poorly executed loving couples gifts, wasn't it? At least it's implied at the end that they didn't break up over it or anything, and that hopefully at some point in the future they'll be able to laugh it off. Speaking of laughing, some idiot I used to know was convinced pepper in the eye wasn't nearly as painful as people made it sound. We just watched him pour pepper in his open eyes and laughed when the screaming began. A frickin' eyelash in my eye or a speck of dirt has me going, ow, 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 frick. So why on earth would you doubt the painful powers of a spice? I was in Yosemite doing a hike up to the top of, I think, Vernal Falls. Some kid from a large church group decided to swim at the top in the seemingly but not really calm water there. I saw that kid get swept up and taken away over the edge. The water has been running over there for thousands of years, so the rocks are smooth and there's no vegetation. There's literally nothing to grab a hold of if it happens to you. I was not in the mood to see a kid go like that day. Read the signs and please stay the heck out of the water if you're told to. He wasn't found that day, or the next, or the next. I spoke to a ranger and he said that sometimes they don't get to retrieve anything until the summer when the falls have dried up. This is because often those who fall get stuck in a current and get thrown around in one area at the bottom like they're in a washing machine. It's impossible to get to them or even see them. I have no idea what's left of them after months of that. So, yeah, stay well clear of waterfalls, folks. Our English teacher told us about this incident that happened a few years ago. He went to this beach with his family, but it was high tide. The warning flags were up and everything, so they couldn't swim. This lady comes along and lets her 3 kids go into the water. He tries to stop them and tells her it's high tide, but she wouldn't listen and the kids go into the water anyway. Of course, the worst comes to pass and the kids are drowning. My English teacher and a few other men swim out and save the kids while fighting against the tide. When all the kids were saved, he gave the woman a proper scolding. He is a teacher after all. He says it still terrifies him to think what could have happened if the tide had been any stronger. While over at his house, one of my best friends decided on a whim to snort cayenne pepper. For science. It went about as well as you could expect. My idiot friend badly shocked himself trying to light a cigarette with his electric arc stun device. When I was about 7 years old, I was in the car with my parents going across the bridge from Niagara Falls, Ontario to Niagara Falls, New York. The deadly Niagara River is right below. There was quite a wait due to traffic, so we were pretty much stopped. A bunch of teenagers were goofing around, hopping out of their car and play fighting and stuff. One guy hopped up on the railing of the bridge and did a handstand. It was terrifying. His friends yelled at him and he hopped down again. Then he did the same thing and fell over the railing. 30 years later, I still dream about that sometimes. I had a friend ask another friend to shoot him with a blow dart. First, the guy shot him in the leg, but my friend thought that was too easy. He was an overly confident Marine Reserve, so he asked him to shoot him in the side. The guy did, and it punctured a lung, though he wouldn't admit it. He tried to play it cool and decided to go home when he was really going to the hospital. We all followed him to his car, trying to convince him to let one of us drive or call an ambulance, but he just kept saying nothing was wrong. He collapsed right as he unlocked his car, and we had to call 911. He's fine now, aside from his injured ego and dim wits. A girl married her boyfriend the summer after junior year of high school. Then they dropped out and then split up before they were even married for a whole year. I don't always judge people for marrying young, but this was clearly a series of bad decisions. A friend signed with a professional sports organization at 18 years old for $1.2 million and spent 95% of it on junk without putting any of it into an investment fund. We asked my friend why he proposed to his controlling, angry girlfriend of 5 miserable years. I did it so she'd stop asking. The wedding is in 3 months. Ooh. Outside a bar, the bouncers offer to pay for a cab. The guy says no, calls his girlfriend, she won't pick him up because of the baby. He says he won't drive, walks off, gets in his car, does 80 miles per hour down a side road and gets busted for DUI. He was offered a free cab ride home, effed up his life and could have killed someone. This guy, let's call him Sean, was young and had never been with a woman before. He started seeing this married girl that was separated from her husband. He gets some and falls in love immediately. A few months later, her and her husband decide to try and work it out for their kids. Sean can't stop thinking about her, so he figures out a way to get her away from her husband. He walks up to their living room window and caps the husband in the head with a .22 rifle, while he's playing with his 4-year-old daughter. He's doing life for premeditated murder. A girl I know spent $50,000 on a wedding for a marriage that lasted 6 months. 2 of my friends were at a party drinking. Friend number 1 shows off his gat to friend number 2, tells him it's not loaded, points the weapon at his head and pulls the trigger. Forget the years of jail time, he has to live with killing his friend for the rest of his life. I slowed down from 100 km per hour to about 80 on a highway because I saw a large kangaroo at the side of the road up ahead. The young guy behind me revved his car at me and drove really close and held his horn down, obviously annoyed. I'd gently put the brakes on so I couldn't understand what his problem was. He just kept revving too. I put the brakes on again when I saw the roo starting to take off in front of me. It would have safely passed in front of my car until the idiot behind me floored it around my car and absolutely decapitated the poor animal right in front of me. It went up and over his bonnet, rolled down the side of the car, finishing under the back wheel. I saw it bend in half the wrong way. He pulled over further ahead and I drove past him with tears in my eyes. I'm shocked. He had a really nice expensive-looking car and the roo was very big, so I really hope it did some exceptional damage to that loser's car, lest its death be a total waste. Yeah, I mean, this absolutely sucks, but in terms of what happened to the guy's vehicle, I feel like this is tinged with just a little bit of sweet satisfaction. Drive like an aggressive moron? Fine. Have a bucket of offal all over your vehicle and a few grand at a panel beater. Enjoy! A friend of my dad's sold up his house in central London and bought a place in France. 15 acres, swimming pool, 8-bed house, and a smaller house on the side. Problem was that it needed tons of maintenance, lots of repair work, and a small supply of staff just to keep it running. Now, this wouldn't be a problem for a multi-millionaire like the previous owner, but this guy wasn't. He only had the money for the sale of his house, which was dwindling fast. It was also a 50-mile round trip to the local shops and pub. There was no internet and no TV. So he's bored out of his mind and has no company except his missus, and I think the realization of this situation was beginning to set in. People tried to talk him out of it, but sometimes when people get an idea in their head, there's nothing you can say that will change their minds. I can see them trying to sell next year, but I don't think it will go very well. I think the previous owner was glad to be rid of it, to be honest, and I don't know how long he had that up for sale. I was on tour when we played Newcastle in England. Decently big gig for some small-timers like us. When discussing with the hosts, they mentioned that we should go and give the opening act a confidence boost as it was their first ever gig. Went down and met with them, talked to them, and they seemed absolutely confident as hell. Soon discovered that they were an experimental band and that none of the guys had actually played their instruments before. That's right, they'd decided to put a band together of non-musicians, not rehearse, and play on the night thinking that it would make them seem creative and ambitious. It was atrocious and cringy is what it was. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I saw a rookie drinker at a house party mix Snapple with a half glass of Everclear, thinking Everclear was a simple alcohol mixer. 20 minutes later, projectile throw up everywhere. In a redeeming moment, a few hours later, he drunkenly got up from his sleep and decided to haphazardly mop the kitchen and then went back to bed. A guy I knew in the military made enough money during deployment to pay off his student debt. He bought a car instead. I went to a party with a friend and she smoked crystal. I worked in retail in college and met her there. She was really nice and we had the same sense of humor. After a few weeks, she invited me to a house party in the middle of nowhere, and it was like all dudes in their 30s. She was dating one of them, and we were like the only girls. I wanted to leave right away because not only were the people weird, but the house was weird too. Like there were no outlet covers on the outlets, barely any furniture, but there was an exotic dancing pole in the living room. She drove and convinced me to stay for one drink, and when I got back from the kitchen with a beer, she asked me if I wanted to smoke crystal with her. She actually called it something else, but I didn't understand, and only figured it out after she started explaining to me. I declined and then went kind of into shock as she started to smoke it anyway, while her boyfriend started telling me that it wasn't as bad as people think. I ended up calling my boyfriend to come and get me and walking to the main road to wait for him because I didn't really want to be anywhere near that house. The next time I saw her at work, she told me that a few hours after I'd left, a guy who'd been punched at the party had called the cops, and she had been too afraid to go back to her car after running from the house, so she had spent the whole night just walking around in the nearby woods. I quit like 2 months later and never saw her again, but my friend who continued to work there told me a few months after the girl was fired for smoking crystal in the bathroom at work. In high school, I watched a guy who didn't smoke light a cigarette and announce to a crowd of kids that he was going to smoke for 1 month and then just stop, just to show smokers how easy it was to quit. That was like 17 years ago, and he still smokes. Once in middle school, while we were changing after gym class, this one kid decided to steal my Axe body spray out of my locker. He was completely undressed and ran away when I confronted him. As he got to the other side of the locker bay, he hopped up on the bench and, as if to taunt me, sprayed the Axe body spray directly onto the tip of his manhood. It definitely didn't seem pleasant from his reaction. Second-hand story, but here we go. A colleague of a friend of mine came into work excited about having bought a new house. She thought she'd got a great deal because they took like $50,000 off the original price. Why? Because they found out the place was completely infested with termites. Really, all she bought was a very expensive piece of land. And no, she wasn't deceived or misled by the previous owner. She knowingly bought Termite City, thinking that she could turn it around somehow. Oh boy, that's extreme real estate optimism right there. Honestly, the narrator is looking to buy his first place, and stories like this are probably good to read because they're ramping up my skepticism and will hopefully prevent me from befalling a similar fate. 18 years ago, I watched somebody quit their $20 an hour job, and remember this is 2007 money, blow through $25,000 of savings, get ripped off trying to restore a Honda from the 80s, that's where the $25,000 went, lose all their friends, default on all their credit cards, lose their luxury condo, move in with their grandpa, get kicked out by said grandpa, move in with their dad and stepmom, get a new job for minimum wage at their dad's work. And why did all these things happen, you might ask? It was a severe fear of growing up. This isn't speculation, that's literally his reasoning. I saw a guy eat roadkill as part of a dare. Hospitalized for 3 weeks for infection that led to vomiting that Maxilon wouldn't work in that led to a hernia, which led to sepsis. I was in high school, 2 grades under this girl that was graduating in less than a month. She was brilliant and had amazing grades, but she dropped out to become a manager at a Hungry Jack's. That's a chain here in Australia. She ended up getting demoted after a few months because they transferred a new manager in that had 20 years of experience. She could have easily baked the cake and ate it as well, but to this day I can't understand why she'd just drop out like that. Her parents were mad. There was this one incident in my hometown that made me want to tear my hair out. A family moved in a few years ago. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl. The mother was looking for work as a teacher, but there were no openings, so she worked as an aide. My mother was on the school board at the time, and she noticed that the parents were complaining about the lady, as she was apparently ignoring students and favoring others, getting angry when her children got bad grades from other teachers, stuff like that. My mum invited her to the next school board meeting to discuss the situation, and the lady went nuts. The conversation broke into screaming, and this lady swore she'd take Mum's spot on the board. Sure enough, when election signs went up online, she was the only person who ran against my mum. After months of an attempted smear campaign, my mum won the election with more than 200 votes. That lady only got 5, and all of them were from her extended family. So, what does the lady do? She decides to pull both of her children out of public school as she doesn't want them corrupted by the teachers and the board. The son was a senior in high school, months away from graduation, and the daughter was in middle school. My sister was in her class, and she said the daughter screamed and kicked her mum as she dragged her out of the classroom to check her out, begging her not to do it. She left all of her stuff in her locker, and the school had to send it to them. When Mum heard the news, she was horrified and tried to talk to the family, but the father had been browbeaten by his wife and refused to put the kids back in public. It's been a couple of years since then. The mum homeschooled the kids, but the son works in the oil field and is trying to get his GED. The daughter is a complete rebel and has been arrested numerous times for drunk driving and vandalism. But the mum still has the audacity to act smug whenever someone runs into her at the grocery store. At least my children know how to live in the real world. Sure, Kathy, keep telling yourself that when you have to bail your kid out from jail. My mum didn't even hate her in the slightest, but was very upset that she did this to her kids, who didn't do anything wrong. Both kids were under 18, so the son couldn't just go back to school on his own. Betting $5,000 on 17 on roulette. I saw an entire country elect an uneducated reality TV star as their president once. Well, now twice. Trivia night at the TGIF Fridays. One of the questions was, which band originally wrote and sang While My Guitar Gently Weeps? I said it was the Beatles, but a friend said it was Prince. Cue a bunch of people saying, wait, I think you're right. Yeah, he had that awesome live solo a few years ago. I insisted it was the Beatles, so we put it to a vote. I lost the vote, and we lost that point. Frick you, Gavin. Frick you, team. I watched my brother pre-order No Man's Sky. Luckily, it was only a short-term bad decision. A woman married my ex-husband after she witnessed him snapping my wrist like a twig, carrying on an affair with him for a year of our marriage, and knowing full well he was an addict. It was like watching a train wreck. I had to keep repeating to myself that it wasn't my problem. My friend met a girl at a wedding on the last day of a short overseas trip and decided to cancel his flight home the next day and stay in a foreign country with no job, no place to live, barely any money, and a tourist visa, just to try and get with her. This was 5 years ago, and they're engaged now. So I guess the decision was, in a way, the best decision he had ever made. Still seemed really short-sighted at the time, though. My dad watched his best friend for 35 years drink himself into an alcoholic, essentially ruining his own life. They were drinking buddies for a long time, but my dad began to suspect he had a problem and tried to shake him out of it and quit drinking himself too to avoid encouraging him to drink. His best friend's eventual DUIs and increasingly protective wife led to a strain on his relationship with my dad and anyone else he knew from high school or college. Now his wife won't let anybody talk to him ever again. My dad misses him greatly and won't stop telling stories about the antics they used to get up to when they were kids, always addressing him as uncle in the last few years we used to see each other. They started out in the sandbox at age 2 and eventually broke loose in their 30s. My best friend was marrying a girl just because they had a kid together. Everything was working out fine between them as friends, and their daughter, though only 3, seemed happy as hell. Then they started to be friends with benefits and began dating once again. Out of nowhere, they announced that they were getting married. Everyone knew this was a bad idea considering their history and that marriage shouldn't be a thing you just try one day. Anyway, the wedding day comes and it's your typical affair. Church, priest, gown, flower girl, cake, all the usuals. It was an uncomfortable experience for us as his friends, since we felt like it wasn't set to last between the two of them. We didn't know how right we were. 2 months in and they're fighting almost every night. He tells me that anything will trigger a fight between them. One night it comes to a head when their fighting becomes physical. She shoves him, he shoves back, she punches him in the chin, he hits her in the left eye hard, and problem is she's petite and only 5 foot tall, meanwhile he's 6 foot 3 inches, former bodybuilder. She called the cops and had him arrested. She now has full custody of the daughter and he spent 3 weeks in jail over the whole thing. So much for giving marriage a try. What's the most uncanny coincidence you've ever experienced? My old work ran a Secret Santa once the week before Christmas. It was a $10 limit and the person I was buying for I didn't know very well. I left my buying to the last minute because I just didn't know what to get her. So I was in town and walking past some shops when lo and behold I see an old copy of Oliver Twist in the window of the second-hand bookstore. It just called to me, so I went in and picked it up. I checked the first page for the cost, and guess what? $10. Perfect. So, come the day of the Secret Santa, we were all opening our gifts, some 150 people. Out of the corner of my eye, I see some people crowding around a woman who's crying. I keep listening, and people are calling out for the person who was her Santa. I go over and reveal that it was me. The lady I'd bought for was crying and hugged me. She said 10 years ago her house burned down along with all of her possessions. The book that I bought her was her favorite and also the exact same edition, so had the exact same cover she remembered. Because it was a second-hand book, it was even weathered in the same places she remembered. So it was as if I'd grabbed the book off her shelf before the fire and delivered it to her 10 years later. Here in my little town in northwest England, there's a good kebab shop from which the lads and I have ordered for years. We've been there after countless nights out and had them deliver to our doors, so we know the guys who work there pretty well. They're mostly Turkish. Once a few of us got together for a short break in Turkey. Having got off the plane, we waited in the car park outside for another pal who'd been on a different flight. As we stood soaking in the ambience of the new country, none other than the tall guy from our local kebab shop in the UK walked across the road right in front of us, 2,000 miles from home. That was weird. Seeing Paul McCartney of the Beatles on TV in 2001 and noticing that he was tall. Next day, I'm walking down a very quiet street and walking towards me is a really tall guy, and it's Paul McCartney. He must have seen my expression, so he veered my way, stuck his hand out and said, "Hi, mate." I was shocked. 18 years later and I'm still shocked. Crazy. Then he briskly walked away. A very brief encounter, but very important for me. I also wouldn't blame anyone for not believing me. It's a weird story. I used to get 2 buses home from work. I got off the first one, having left my phone and keys on the front seat of the bus without realizing. Got on the second bus, went to my favored front seat, and my possessions that I didn't know were missing were waiting for me. The bus had changed driver and route. It still freaks my nut out to this day. That's what we in the business of life call a freebie, my friend. I have never in my life got back anything I've left on the bus, and that list of objects is irritatingly long and growing. And I've tried very hard to get some of those items back. If you'd had to call the bus company about finding this stuff, I'm willing to bet that you would have never found it. Nobody believes me when I tell this story, but one day my husband and I ran into the same couple in 3 different places in 2 different states. So my husband and I had an errand to run out of state. We left early and stopped to get breakfast. The couple was sitting across from us. The lady had a funky shirt, which is why she stuck out in my mind. After breakfast, we drive to the next state over to the office that we have an appointment at. We're waiting in the lobby and the couple from breakfast walks in. Weird. So we spend the day finishing up our errands and then we drive back home. I didn't feel like cooking, so we stopped to get some dinner at the pub. We sit down at the table, and guess who's already eating at the table behind us? The same frickin' couple. I was in St. Augustine on vacation. On the way there, I just happened to think about this girl I knew back in college in Orlando. Just sort of wondered what she was up to and the like. Sure as heck, I ran into her in a bar there the first night. She was there celebrating graduating from PA school. Similar thing happened to me. I dated this guy Steven when I was in my late 20s, and we lived together for a year and then we broke up, and I was devastated. It had been about 3 or 4, maybe even 5 years since I'd seen him when I was walking in Santa Monica with my best friend, and I said to her, "You know what's weird? Steven and I have so many friends in common, and I've never seen him in this whole time since we broke up." 5 minutes after that, we walked across the street and into a restaurant, and who's sitting there but Steven? Me and a friend took some tabs of A one night, and we were tripping hard. Decided to walk to a gas station and get some smokes or something. We walked by a car lot in the small town I'm from, and all of the cars in the lot were cop cars. We were both walking ramrod straight all the way to the store, very quietly bought whatever we wanted there, then took a back street back to his place. We just stared at each other for like an hour and didn't speak until after we got there. Turns out the city had brought a whole new fleet of cop cars and they'd all been delivered there and were just on the lot for that night. Was sitting in a restaurant about 200 miles from where I live, telling my mother, who was visiting from a different country, about a trip I had to another country about 6,000 miles away with a work colleague. And the lady at the table next to us leans over and says, "I think you're talking about my son." Turns out I was sitting next to my colleague's parents while showing my mum pictures of our trip. I was in Paris and some Americans were lost. They were the grandparents of my high school classmates from Nebraska. It's a small world. In grade 10 English class, the teacher didn't have anything planned for us to do and it was close to the end of the year, I guess. So she goes to the big cupboard in the corner and pulls out a stack of copies. It's examples of a successful essay written during a final exam. So we can learn what a good one looks like and how to build a narrative, stuff like that. The topic of these was what was the most pivotal moment of your life. There's 3 examples ranging in proficiency. We read through the first 2 and I volunteer to read the last one aloud. I start reading and I stop. The essay was about me. My big sister had gotten a really good mark 6 years earlier on her final exam essay, which she wrote about the day I was born. I got pretty emotional about that one. Worked a half day. Drove 6 hours from Southern California to Northern California for car camping with my wife. Chose an obscure campground which was nearly deserted, off-season, picked the most deserted and remote campsite location. We planned on rocking the tent. Then we were bummed after setting camp and another couple selects the site right next to us. Turned out to be a coworker I'd spoken with earlier that day. I hadn't told the coworker anything about plans. We weren't close. Earlier that day, we spoke briefly of a work-related issue. My wife and I were in Tucson visiting my mother who'd just moved there. My wife decided she wants a tamale. We drove around for 2 hours, stopping in restaurants looking for tamales. Couldn't find one. Went back to my mother's apartment. Literally 2 minutes later, someone knocked on the door of my mother's apartment, asking us if anyone wanted to buy tamales. One year I got a roommate through Craigslist. The guy was weird for sure, but good-natured and paid rent. Anyway, after about 2 months of living with him, my cousin comes over to hang. I introduced the two, and my cousin in the most chill voice ever said, "Nah man, we know each other." Turns out they were college roommates 5 years earlier in another state. Not me, but a pretty interesting story in my family. 2 of my great-grandfathers got imprisoned in the same jail and served time together. My great-grandfather on my mother's side was an architect and even drew my other great-grandfather's house. Just 2 dudes in prison. My parents got together over 30 years after their incarceration. I think they found out when my grandparents met each other. This is also kind of like a dark spot on the family's history, and my grandparents don't like to talk about it. My sister Emily was on a ski lift in New Mexico when some younger girl across from her asked if her name was Emily. Apparently, the stranger, who looked kind of similar but underage, had found her lost ID the year prior and had been using it for a year to buy alcohol. And it gets weirder. She was later hiking with friends for 17 hours. They got tired, thumbed for a hitchhike, and got picked up by this girl's twin. I met a Canadian guy while on holiday in South America, and we ended up going sightseeing together. At the end of the day, a person behind us tapped him on the shoulder and asked if the scar behind his ear was from cancer surgery. They got talking. Turns out they were from the same small town in Canada, had the same type of brain cancer, and had been operated on by the same surgeon. I moved from my small hometown, halfway across the country, to a small city where I knew absolutely no one. At the first party I went to in the new town, I started chatting with a guy. Turns out he'd also just left my small hometown. Haha, I hope that the introductions were drawn out by both of you just saying, "Oh, but you wouldn't have heard of where I'm from," and just referring to it as my little town in the sticks, before you finally realized that you basically only had the same stories. Was at the dentist getting a crown extension. The dentist said, "Hey, you were born on July 13th, so was I." His assistant piped up, "Me too." We all shared a look of surprise and longing with each other, longing to be closer. Then they drilled the absolute F out of my teeth. Had a kidney transplant last year. The nurse makes a comment about it having my name on it. He then elaborated to say that the donor had the same surname as me. An officer from a different police department was showing me a picture of the guy they wanted to arrest in a different part of town. As I look up from my computer, I see the guy riding by on a bike, literally 5 feet away from the squad car. I can imagine this like it's a scene from a movie. Yep, we never could catch the genius. said genius passers-by slowly on a bike. "He sure was an elusive son of a witch." Said son of a witch waves at the cop waves back. "Yeah, we've really just given up at this point. Who knows where he is? He could be halfway across the country by now." 2 years ago, I was in Tokyo on holiday. I looked on Instagram and saw an old friend post a story showing he was also in Tokyo. We hadn't spoken in a few years, but I sent him a message letting him know we were in the same city. Not even 5 minutes later, we walked into a bar and he was standing there. This past November, I was in Toronto on business. After dinner, we went to a pub downtown. The first person I saw when I walked in was the same friend from Tokyo. We both live in Winnipeg. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I was at a convention. There were only a few people in the room. My friend and I wanted an autograph from a voice actor. He started singing in his character voice. There were 2 random guys next to me. One pulled out a video camera to record it. Years later, my husband and I are talking with friends and the convention comes up. The guy with the video camera was my husband. I also took a picture later that day of the crowds, and he's in that picture. I stood next to my husband years before I met him and didn't even realize it. I have an uncommon last name and a not too common first name. I was in the hospital for surgery, and the person in the next room was there for the same surgery. Came to find out that we were second cousins and never knew that the other existed. He had the same name as me, and his wife had the same name as my wife. I've had several small world experiences, but the biggest was talking to a girl after my first university class and discovering through the course of a 2-hour-long conversation that our grandmothers had been each other's maids of honor and my aunt and her mum were best friends since childhood. Back in the early to mid-90s, the phone system changed and you no longer needed to dial the area code for a long-distance in-state call. We're a small state with only one area code. One morning, I woke up to the phone ringing, and when I picked it up, I recognized the voice on the other end as belonging to my old boss from a few years ago. She had an unmistakable voice. We had a nice conversation for a bit before she realized she had dialed the wrong number. I lived in a different part of town in a different part of state, but the number must have just been off by only 1 digit from the one she had tried to call. To add to the coincidence, I'd overslept and would have been late if she hadn't called me and woken me up. Both of my grandfathers were named William, and both grandmothers were named Joyce. There are at least 2 ways that could happen, and only one involves a wild coincidence. Started dating a girl a few weeks ago. We got to talking about where we lived and stuff. She lives in not only the same building, but the exact same apartment I lived in 2 years ago. It was so frickin' bizarre walking into my old apartment that I never thought I'd see again. What are the odds? The person who sits next to me at work copies everything I do, except she has no way of knowing. I wear a blue sweater, she wears a blue sweater. I bring leftover spaghetti, she brings leftover spaghetti. It's so weird I almost hate her. When I was 18, I lived in a town a very long ways away from where I ended up moving. I struck up a friendship with this guy from work in that town. We played Halo, watched movies, etc. He was awesome. I ended up moving suddenly due to a family emergency, and I never got his contact info. I didn't even remember his name a decade later, but I thought of him often as he was an awesome guy through all the years. 11 years later, I'm working at my job, carpooling with someone from my training class, and one night he asks if I mind his roommate being in the car, as he was going to take the car after we got off at work and use it for the night. He introduces us. I turn around and in the back seat is the guy from the town a very long ways away. We reconnected immediately and now live together. He's my best friend for sure, and the godfather to my children. When I was a kid, around 13, I played a lot of a video game called Diablo 2. I started a clan with a few people I'd met on the internet, and we played every day. At some point, we were helping some random person and he asked to join. We thought he was nice enough, so we let him in. As part of this clan, we had a shared account that we used to store game items for each other. After about a month of playing, this new guy goes in and changed the password, steals the account and defriends everyone. Completely disappears off the map with all of our stuff. Fast forward a year later, and my family moves to Texas, and it's my first day at school. I'm sitting in algebra class talking to the person in the seat next to me, and he mentions he plays Diablo. I said, me too, that I ran a clan and everything. I asked his username, and it was him. 2,000 miles away from where I first virtually met this guy, he's sitting next to me in math class. When I told him mine, his face went into total shock, and he didn't know how to respond. It was awkward for sure. Ended up telling him I didn't care and was over it, but let's just say we didn't end up becoming friends. I wonder what was going through his head at that moment. Whether you, the new kid from out of town, had in fact come to the Lone Star State to exact vengeance, beat him up in front of his peers, and take your hard-won account back. Kind of disappointing to have it just be a, okay moment. Funny though. When I was 1 year old, we moved to a city some 500 kilometers away from where I was born. 15 years later, my father decided to put me in a frickin' boarding school in the area of that first city, because he went there too. I got randomly put in a room with 2 other guys, which one of them is still my best friend today. When I first visited that friend at his home, I discovered that he not only lives in the same city as we did, which isn't too much of a coincidence I guess, as it's the only major city in that area, but in the same frickin' house. Of course I couldn't remember our old house, so I called my father to confirm that it's the same address, and it turns out that he very briefly knew my friend's family from selling the house. Last summer I went to New York with my family for a week. A friend of mine that I hadn't seen since she graduated from college was living and working in New York at the time, so we decided to meet up for drinks. As we were walking through Times Square at 11 p.m. on a Saturday, who did we see on the other side of the street but another friend of ours from college? I knew he had been living in New Jersey, but he was in New York for a grinder date. The 3 of us went to a bar and talked about life and how none of our friends live in Ireland anymore. They've all moved abroad. It was bittersweet and a crazy coincidence that 3 friends from a small university in Dublin would serendipitously meet in New York City. Went to college, met a cute girl. Where did you go to school? She asks. Oh, you've never heard of it, I reply. I grew up in a town of 1,200 people and graduated in a class of about 90. Try me, she says. And that was the beginning of finding out that not only had she heard of it, she had almost attended it, because her family had lived in one of the neighboring towns very briefly when she was growing up. We shared dozens of mutual friends and had apparently spent our young lives narrowly missing each other. Later, after we started dating, we learned that one of our mutual friends had been trying to set us up with each other for years. She was overwhelmed with laughter when she saw that we were finally together completely without her involvement. I asked her to marry me, she said yes. We went out to dinner with our parents so they could finally meet. Her folks arrived at the restaurant and see mine, and her mum goes, "Oh, hey John, so this is your son, huh? They'd been co-workers years ago." Of course. We've been married for 11 years now, got a good thing going. We intend to keep it up. When I was a kid while hiking with my dad, I was babbling and said, "The teacher told us if you speak too much, a fly will get in your mouth." In that exact moment, a fly flew into my mouth. I'd recently moved cities and had a new local phone number. Had to make a lot of calls to various utilities and stuff to get everything set up. I called one of them, was speaking with the customer service rep, all was going fine until she asks for my phone number. When I tell her, she starts freaking out on me. "Who are you? How did you find me? How do you know that phone number?" Eventually, I managed to get her calmed down to the point where we could figure out what was going on. Turned out she had been in a really bad relationship where her ex had stalked and harassed her, including him and his friends making threatening phone calls constantly. Eventually, she had to move to a different part of the city and take a new unlisted phone number. My new phone number was her old one, and the moment I said it, she assumed he had tracked her down once again and that the stalking was about to begin anew. I'm not sure she truly believed me when I explained it all, but we eventually got through the phone call. When my best friend and I were about 16 years old, we'd both had a bunch of coins we were taking to Coinstar at Kroger. We had the exact same total in coins down to the last penny. My best friend in high school had the exact same locker combination as me in a school of 1,200 people. Saw a combo written on a piece of paper of his, and I asked why he wrote down my combo. He looked confused and said that's his combo. The combination locks are changed and reassigned each year. In freshman physics, I became friends with the Japanese kid next to me. After a while, he was helping me with my Japanese homework. Did really well after that, by the way. But after that class, we kind of drifted apart. Fast forward 2 years where I'm an exchange student in Japan over the summer and doing some sightseeing in Kyoto after the program. I was crossing the street in Kyoto and I heard my name being called out. I look around and there he is. Thousands of miles apart, we meet again. We got some drinks and good food together. It was a blast. No, his hometown was not Kyoto. He was also doing sightseeing while home for the summer. Oh, definitely the shadow eggplant incident. One night in university, I was fooling around with my then-girlfriend and noticed that the brightness of the TV caused us to cast distinct shadows on the wall behind us. Being 19 and a fool, I took this opportunity to take a Snapchat of the shadow of my manhood on the wall and sent the pic to my best friend. I thought it would elicit an interesting reaction, but could not have prepared for what was next. You see, on Snapchat, you can see when someone receives your message as well as when it's opened. So as my message is sending, still unopened by him, I receive a Snapchat from the same guy. I open it and lo and behold, what do I see? A shadow dingle snap. This man decided, at the exact same time I did, to send an identical pic of his appendage's shadow on the wall. Both of our girlfriends were confused, thinking it was some inside joke, when in reality we'd never spoken of or sent shadow sausages ever before. In short, I decided to snap a pic of my pecker's shadow to my best friend at the exact same time he decided to do the same. What was the most pretentious college application you've ever seen? I got to interview some students for a special program in my undergrad. It was highly competitive and lots of people wanted in. A young lady comes in, I offer her a seat. "Oh, I'd prefer to stand, thanks. This won't take long." "Oh, it won't?" "No, my dad is the dean of one of the colleges and my mum is one of the professors who established this program. I'm getting in." I emphasized that she should really take a seat. She refused again. So I say, "Hey, this interview? Me approving you is part of the process. You have to do well in this to get in. You'll say I did well, or my parents will make life hell for you." Her parents had zero impact on anything in my life, and I told her as such. After articulating this to her, I said, "I'm going to give you a chance to walk out the door and restart this interview. Fresh start." She lost it and yelled at me. For like 5 minutes. I filled out the interview sheet with direct quotes from her tantrum. She didn't get in. A few days after my decisions were made, I got an email from her father who was, in fact, a dean. He asked me to come in and have a chat with him. It was totally a request. I went to talk to him. When I went to see him, he had a copy of the interview sheet where I had several direct quotes from his daughter. Some of the quotes were awful and directed at me, my family, and basically everything she could hit on. He apologized profusely for his daughter and asked if she could redo the interview. He was leaning on me a bit at this point. I told him that choices had already been made and she was not selected. The whole thing was mind-blowing. She was so entitled. I worked in a very religious private school's admissions department for a few weeks, filing applications. The parents had to write a letter about their child and why the school would suit them. I'll always remember the man who wrote 3 pages about how successful a businessman he was, how he owned several businesses, how good he was at the school's main sport, and then attached a large check to the last page. Not a word about the kid. What I remember most? The rejection letter from the principal with a thinly veiled insinuation that bribery was immoral and not acceptable at the school. Well, that's a refreshing rebuke to what I imagine would be a successful tactic to most schools, albeit a tactic you'd normally at least disguise as a donation. I hope the kid got into a good place where he could maximize his potential anyway. I'm just glad he won't be using dad's credentials to breeze through and have a shock when he finishes. At this particular school anyway. They probably just did this at another. I was a medical school interview coach, earning some extra money through med school. Some applicants were great. Others were what you'd expect from kids whose parents are paying a tutor to teach them how to act normal. Our med school interviews are easy to pass, but difficult to do well in. They involve generic questions like your passions or interests, ethical scenarios, decision-making questions, knowledge of healthcare topics, stuff like that. There have been memorable answers to mock questions. In terms of pretentious, I asked one guy what his hobbies were, and he said he loved Armani suits and buying expensive coffee blends. Not a great answer, but what killed it was that he began describing the smoothness of the bean, and licking and smacking his lips together in wet, squelching noises. Another applicant's dad was a successful surgeon, so he argued in his answers, "I basically already know how to be a doctor through osmosis." He'd failed the entrance exam 7 times and his dad opened a lot of doors for him, getting him research editor positions for his CV, stuff like that. There were complex family dynamics. He'd say really inappropriate things like, "When I'm a doctor, I can buy and sell you and all your friends." Or, "All I have to do is pass this stupid exam and interview and my dad will get me a spot in the training program. You'll be struggling for years." He'd then flip back to complaining for half an hour about how his sister gets treated like a princess and call me at 10 p.m. just to talk. I declined further sessions, but was pretty sympathetic to be honest. Whenever his dad called to arrange sessions and materials, he was very pejorative towards his son. I had trouble hearing him during one of the phone calls because of the background noise until he stepped outside. Later found out that he'd been calling me a tutor during his son's graduation ceremony. He missed his son going on stage to receive his diploma because he was arranging a booking time with me. It placed a lot of his son's defensive behavior in context. And no, he hasn't been accepted into a med school. That was 2 years ago, and he emailed only a few weeks ago to request access to my Google Drive to brush up on some things. I granted it because when your answer to a conflict in teamwork question is, "I'd tell them I'm sorry that they're wrong," no amount of Microsoft Word documents will change your performance. The letter simply said something along the lines of, "Let me into this hall named after Grandpa. He donated a crap ton of money, so this letter means nothing." Well, he was right. He got in. Gotta love pay-to-play. College bribery scandal, but legal. Oh, I have one. A longtime friend's mother reviews applications at an elite college. I saw her recently and she was telling us about some of the essays. One was from a girl who clearly came from a background of great privilege. She described a day of shopping and dining at swanky places with her parents in the big city one day. At the end of the day, she came across a homeless man sitting on the sidewalk begging for money for food. She initially passed by him, but then, seeing the American flag flying on the corner, ahead on the next block, she remembered what this great country of ours was built on, as well as what life is truly about, and went back to give this homeless person her restaurant leftovers. All described with much self-congratulation. I'm paraphrasing a lot of it, but the part I just quoted is exact and will likely be repeated for some time to come, accompanied by chuckling by my friend and me. The country was built on and life itself is about giving a homeless person your half-eaten burger and fries. Oh my god. We recently had someone we rejected for our most competitive course email us. He said he regretted to inform us that he was unable to accept our rejection and would see us on the first day of the course very soon. One with $100 in it. No, we didn't pocket it and deny them, we sent it back. I went to space camp on a scholarship program after writing an essay to get in. One of the kids in my group, who time and time again proved he wasn't smart enough to write his own essay, bragged about how his mother wrote his and he didn't even want to be there. Messed up on both their parts to take away an opportunity from someone who actually wanted to go. For me, it's the students that disparage the very ones that provide their application support. The kids that bash their coaches for not starting them in their sports game or complain about their teachers who give them too much homework. Meanwhile, the recs and coaches are writing about how great the kid is. It's just not a good look. I was a master's student who helped a family friend's high schooler edit her college admission essay. The prompt was something about the greatest struggle they've experienced that made them who they are. Her response? "My greatest struggle in life was that I was too academically advanced for my age and I wasn't challenged enough in school." Yikes. A whole essay from this one girl about how it had long been my dream to study at the prestigious University of Leicester and all the incredible gifts life would bestow on her for living her dream, in an application for a university that was not Leicester. Well, you see, the narrator has done that with job applications, back in the day where he was sending out 5 of the buggers a day. It's an easy mistake to make. This lady might have been a terrific student for all you know. She also just happened to be copy-pasting different university names into the same letter draft, and then accidentally sending them off, which I will admit is not a great look. I once got a binder with 19 letters of recommendation from what seemed like every adult who'd ever vaguely met the student. We also got photocopies of her scuba license and lifeguard certification. This was just for a college with a 98% acceptance rate. We also had an essay question that was, if you could spend a day with anyone in the world, living or dead, who would it be and why? And some kid wrote about how the college admissions racket discounted who he was as an individual and that he wanted to spend the day with the college admissions officer so that they'd really get to know him. Came off as a bit creepy and again, 98% acceptance rate. If you can write a coherent sentence and didn't murder anyone, you were going to be accepted. We didn't freaking care about your personality. Here's a summary of the questions I'm getting about these letters. So firstly, the matter of criminal records. I worked with international students who were going to get visa applications rejected with felonious pasts. Letting them down early prevented them from spending a lot of time or money trying to enroll when they wouldn't be able to. And why we had an essay with that kind of acceptance rate? It was to make sure the students could string a few sentences along and weed out the students who weren't willing to put in the effort and had no intention of enrolling. And the scuba girl was not applying for marine biology. Only 3 or 4 letters came from people who seemed to have strong relationships to her. The rest were very vague, brief, polite letters from people who were vague acquaintances, sometimes from several years prior, like her childhood camp counselor who had her for 1 week in 4th grade. It was a waste of our time to read them as they told us nothing. She sent us a copy of her scuba certification, but there was another certificate, like 7th grade honor roll or something, that was original, so we ended up paying to mail the entire binder back to her in the end, so she'd have her original. It was also annoying as frick because it didn't fit in our filing cabinet and had to live on my desk for months. I'm not disclosing the school I work at, but it was a private non-profit. I actually honestly believe the faculty were good instructors and the students were going to get a decent education. Being tuition revenue reliant, virtually no endowment, they made some cynical decisions in the admissions office to make it appear we were more competitive and selective, because most people, especially parents who can write a check, assume that's the only mark of a good school. I used to tutor at a uni and helped occasionally with my tutees' applications. One thing I always encouraged them to do was to mention their aspirations after graduating, and to mention why specifically this university. One kid who'd been a pretentious butthole the whole time actually wrote in his essay that he didn't really care about the academic part because his dad was just going to give him a job when he graduated anyways. He chose the unis he was applying to based on how impressive they sounded and how good the party life was. I kept in touch with his sister. She was super smart and studied the same subject as me, so I helped her with career advice and stuff later on. She dropped into conversation later with a noticeable bit of glee that her brother was going through a challenging patch because his father informed him that no, daddy was not going to give him a free ride into a cushy job and did in fact expect him to get a real job. The sister is definitely the smart one, but especially for staying in touch. I've tried to help various young workers in my field, but it's amazing how many just completely fail to realize how important networking is. Not so much as in the I know a guy who's going to give me a sweet job thing, but more in the here's someone who's been where I am and I can use the advice. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I reviewed an application from someone with test scores and grades in the upper percentiles of the school's average. As long as the essay was inoffensive and decent, we would have let him in. But his essay was easily the most awful thing I'd ever read, to the point where I assumed he was trying to sabotage his application. However, after we rejected him, he, not his parents, called the school complaining and sent an appeal begging for acceptance. The essay started out okay. The first paragraph he talked about why he chose this school, that was the prompt, and what he hoped to achieve in his time at college. So far so good. But then it got weird. He talked about how he wanted to stop discrimination, this applicant was white by the way, and how he saw racism for the first time in middle school kickball. Whenever a black kid would come up to bat, all of the outfielders would spread out. The applicant described this as systemic racism, and his way of solving it was to kick the ball further than any black person on his team, which he did. First of all, the whole racism topic came out of nowhere and the story didn't tie into anything. After this, he started talking about his favorite podcasts, even mentioning some by name. If you want to know more about my personality, just listen to this podcast. You'll get a better understanding of who I am as a person. He closed the paper by saying, "I'd like to close this paper with a quote," which I thought was a joke because there was nothing left on the page, just that single sentence. Apparently, he had just hit enter on his keyboard a bunch of times, because on the next page was the quote that he wanted to close the essay with. It was a full page-long manuscript of a Richard Pryor comedy routine about going to Africa for the first time. Yep, he kept in all of the N-words in the routine and even went so far as to replace all of the soft R's with hard R's for no apparent reason. At the end were 3 links to the podcast he mentioned, which I didn't listen to because the essay was printed out when I read it, so I couldn't click the links. Oh boy. So this might debatably be a definition of high intelligence, low wisdom, but very selectively high intelligence for whatever he had done in school. Because how sheltered do you have to be to not realize that a single N-word in any body of text that you swear you'd live by is probably going to be a deal breaker in any place? Do better, idiot kid. I'm a college admissions consultant, and the worst one I've read was a full meta-essay about how much the applicant loved college admissions and writing admissions essays. It was arrogant and aloof throughout, but the kicker was when the student called herself an elite applicant with outstanding admissions essay skills right there in the essay. I felt sorry for her because it felt like the stress of the process had given her a Stockholm Syndrome obsession with it. I tried to bring her back to reality gently, but she wasn't having it. She did not get in. Shocked Pikachu face. I was part of an admissions committee when I served as faculty at a wonderful university. One admissions essay compared his act of applying to the law school with that of a Palestinian child facing oppression. The closing line was, "Bravery comes in many forms. A Palestinian child picking up a stone against illegal occupation and me writing this essay, both are comparable. This was written in 2019, by the way. I still haven't forgotten it. Being a professor is a weird and amazing thing. Oh, the stories I have. I used to help out with auditions for the acting program at my school, and one girl came in with a scented resume. Before she walked in, the head of acting was like, "During the interview, do not mention the resume." She was not a good actor. The scented resume was clearly something she thought was cute and charming enough to score her some personality points. Nope. Elle Woods as an actress? I've evaluated placement essays for first-year writing, first semester, second semester, or in rare cases, tested out completely. I remember reading one about how selfies were important because of reasons such as, so people can know where you are, and if you travel, you can use them to take pictures of monuments and landmarks. This student essentially, though I'm not sure intentionally, made the argument that every picture has to be a selfie, and that if they aren't, the picture isn't worth anything. I put them in first semester. Yikes, I've read kinda good essays about selfies. In the past, rich people would pay a lot of money to have paintings done of themselves, but now anyone can admire a picture of themselves, and documenting when you feel good about yourself is good for your self-esteem. That's where I thought they were going with this. I saw an LSAT writing prompt that started with the line, "The leader of the Third Reich had a few good ideas." Really, doesn't matter what you say after that, it also had absolutely nothing to do with the prompt. For clarity, the LSAT has a prompt that consists of some group trying to make a decision between two mundane options. Your goal is to argue for one option over the other. That's it. In no way, shape, or form did the scenario have anything remotely to do with Mr. H, nor did this person pick one of the sides. He simply wrote an essay about this particular historical figure. Have fun not getting into law school. I used to do a little recruitment from time to time for a large cruise line based in the UK. I once had an application through where the applicant's CV was literally him asking himself questions and then proceeding to answer them. It read something like this. So you're probably thinking, who is this guy? Well, I'm a hardworking individual who isn't afraid to go above and beyond. Why go above and beyond, you say? Well, I believe the customer always comes first, blah blah blah, etc. You get the idea. Every essay that uses famous quotes as if they're the first person to ever think of using a famous quote in an essay. Nope, you're not original. I actually don't mind quotes if there's a good story attached to it, but it's rare. People usually just throw in a random quote to sound smarter or more cultured. Execution is the key here. Also, when people write about my school to make it sound like they've done their research and they've clearly just regurgitated information from the website, I know where I work. I don't need you to recite the website back to me. Also, now I'm worried you'll get busted for plagiarism if you become a student here, because you clearly just copied and pasted our website content into your essay. Don't make someone question your academic integrity in your admissions essay. Oh god, it was me. I wrote about how anti-intellectual religion was. I don't even remember the prompt, that was just what I was writing about no matter what. Every other word was a thesaurus drop-in. Jesus fricking Christ, it was bad. It's not about the fedora on your head, it's about the fedora in your heart. Oh, I love this, but for more than one reason. Although the milady fedora presence is very strong here, I also love that you've grown enough as a person to realize why this is cringe. This is positive development, and we all have these moments that we look back at and shudder. Well done. I went to high school with a girl who was top of the class, applying to all the Ivies, 4.0 unweighted GPA, APs, stuff like that. She wrote her essay about how she overcame stereotypes by being smart and a cheerleader. I'd say that's pretty pretentious. Somewhat pretentious, or perhaps just plain weird. I had an individual offer me money to write an application essay which was about himself. He really had a brass pair on him, that one. My best friend was salutatorian of her class of 600. She had only applied to one college and it was an Ivy League. She's an upper-middle-class white girl who plays the harp. She wrote her college essay on being a jet-setter. It pains me to say she was completely shocked when she got flat-out rejected. There was that 5-year-old Chinese kid who had a 15-page resume as part of his application to a selective school. It seemed to be just a list of random crap his parents forced him to do, and they're outright lies. I am not an admissions officer. I'm a school ambassador. I give tours for prospective students and families, and our office is where admissions counselors make decisions. We work closely together as I need to be able to answer questions about admissions. I remember a horror story where a student sent an application, had decent scores, a good essay, but almost no extracurriculars. This is a bit of a red flag, as our school has a unique program from which community interaction is really important. About a week after decisions are posted, admissions received an email from the mother of the student described. She proceeded to rip apart the entire admissions team, saying they, and I quote, "are void of any talent or ability to contribute to society. Yet when you're meant to do your horribly mundane, underpaying, and useless job, you can't even do that right." She proceeded to talk about how her daughter was going to be the next president of the United States and how we'd messed up real bad. This email was met with a response to the tune of, "We're sorry you feel you weren't given a good chance, you can appeal and we'll look again," which is a courtesy that almost all schools will do. The mother replied, and I'm sorry for paraphrasing, "Why would we want to go to your horrendous, vile institution? The grounds of your campus aren't worth the bottom of my daughter's feet. Yada yada yada. Her daughter is apparently the second, third, fourth, and fifth coming of Jesus Christ, all rolled into one, yada yada." And then she got personal, again. She was like, "And by the way, Jenny," that's a different name, but I'm referring to the supervisor of admissions, "I just thought you should know that you're extremely unprofessional on your social media. By the way, Jenny is literally the kindest human being I've met in my entire life, and the worst thing on her social media is like her at a restaurant with her family and an alcoholic beverage on the table." My senior year of high school, we read our college admissions essays for our English class. One student's broad topic was admirable. He wrote about ageism and that it was sad that it stopped people from doing the things they loved. Young people should knit, old people should rollerblade, stuff like that. However, the actual bulk of the essay was him describing how much he loved to play with stuffed turtles. He got into a highly competitive university with that essay, but mostly because his parents worked there. Not pretentious, but I had a Chinese student write in their application, "I hardly ever waste water, paper, or rice." Presumably, he was conflating economics, the degree subject being applied for, with being economical. He also said that he had found a phone and had returned it to the owner, even though he was Russian. Teachers, when did you realize a parent might be dumber than their kid? I had a parent tell me he cut his daughter's hair in a short bob because they noticed her attitude gets bad when her hair gets too long. Then I had another parent tell me his kid was acting dumb for my benefit and that he's really smart at home. They still refused to get him any tutoring. When talking to a parent regarding behavioral issues, the parent said, "Listen, from 8 till 2, he's your problem, not mine." Taught in an old, impoverished town. Father told me he wouldn't allow his son to read poetry because it would, quote, "make him gay." "Every single adult should know where every single child is on campus at all times," the mum said, yelling at me. I'd been giving her son extra help after school, along with some other students. We were 6 weeks in, and the mum hadn't come to back-to-school night or made any attempt to speak to or contact me. She came to pick up her son and had no idea where to go because she hadn't been to our school before or read the after-school group flyer. Instead, she yelled at some other teachers who were waiting out in front of the school with some of their own after-school students to be picked up. They had no idea who she or her child was. She couldn't ask them where my class was because she didn't know the name of her child's teacher. I walked up with her son as this was happening. She turned and continued to chew me out. She said a lot of ridiculous things that day. It was a complete and blatant projection of irresponsibility. At the end of each year, all the students' merits are tallied up and the top 3 students get a prize. One of the parents was complaining about how it's unfair their child started so low every year, it was a lot harder for them to get to the top. The list starts alphabetized. I was told last year that the obvious reason I work in special education is because I, quote, "can't get a job teaching normal children." Yep, that's quite enough humanity for me for one day. Oh, god damn it, I still have another 18 minutes to record. Frickin' crap. Don't be like this adult, they're really stupid. Case closed, on to the next one. I taught 4th grade next to a military base, so my class was in pencil. Midway through the year, I got a Dutch girl. She didn't speak a word of English. Her dad dropped her off in my room after signing her up, then told me not to make any exceptions for her. She'd learn English on her own. However, she was to be exempt from math because she's never had a math class before. The man was an engineer with the army. I taught her math. She appeared to have very limited exposure to it. By the last semester, though, she was on honor roll, including math. "You know, intellectual property is a real gray area," said a parent in regard to their offspring's blatant plagiarism. I remember my teacher caught a kid in our class who plagiarized an entire essay. As he was reading it, the teacher cut in and started reading something off the computer that was almost word for word what the kid wrote. Every single thing he handed in after that, the teacher checked. I remember him claiming to write a song for this one girl he liked. I didn't know it at the time, but it turned out to be a Beatles song. I was in an IEP meeting. When the counselor asked the student what his post-high school plans were, he proudly stated that he was interested in studying animal science. His mother angrily swung her head at him and said, "Animal science? Oh, hell no. What about our plans for the NFL?" The student got embarrassed and said, "Well, I need a backup plan, Mom." And she said, "Not when you're as great a player as you are." The student was mediocre at best at football. Not as bad as some, but when I was student teaching, a parent emailed saying to give his child a C. No reason, just give her a C. She was getting an F, and I couldn't believe the insanity of just saying what boiled down to C, now. Well, yes, my child is misbehaving, throwing chairs, hitting other kids, but you took his paper airplane in 2nd grade and scrunched it up, so this is really your own doing. I think the best thing to do is for you to help him make a new paper airplane and then just apologize. I'm sure he'll behave. The kid was in 6th grade at this point. Spanish class. The parent asked me to exempt her kid from speaking anything in Spanish. Said it made her daughter uncomfortable to say anything in Spanish. I had an Asian kid that was acing everything. Straight A's. I told his mother that I think he's a little bored. She puffed up and said, "I'll go home and speak to him about that at once." I used to be a preschool teacher, and we did evaluations every few months. One 4-year-old girl, sweet as could be, could only count to the number 4. She struggled with other things, but the counting was by far the worst. Her parents came into the evaluation and were delighted that their daughter could count to 4. We had to gently explain to them that she was well behind the other kids. Even the actually challenged kids surpassed her. She was obviously bright, so we asked them what they worked on with her at home. Nothing. They did nothing with her. They assumed that she didn't or wouldn't start learning till their teachers taught her. To their credit, they did start working with her at home, and by the beginning of the next year, she was ready to move up. I've never been so proud and disappointed at the same time in a set of parents. When I was a swim instructor, this parent was complaining about how her son wasn't improving in swim lessons. It was true that sometimes I had trouble motivating him, but I felt he was doing well. Apparently, she also complained that I wasn't the only one teaching his lessons and that I got several substitutes. That's not true, I taught all of the lessons. So in the next lesson, I thought the kid was doing well again and improving. I even got him to swim short distances without assistance. He was 5 years old and he couldn't touch the bottom, by the way. The mother didn't seem to agree with his progress. She said something like, "He can't just keep going back and forth and kicking the whole time. I mean, you do realize that's how people swim, right, lady?" They sadly didn't come back. My aunt's a teacher, and I remember her telling me about one strange parent encounter about a year ago. She taught the 6th or 7th grade. There was this one kid in her class who was severely underperforming, and even after numerous confrontations with him, he never worked in class or got his grades back up. My aunt had to call his mother down to the school and sit down and just try to talk to her about it. She mentioned that she felt he had the capacity to perform much better, but he just didn't. And the mother just denied it. To be clear, she wasn't crazy or anything, just in absolute denial. My aunt showed his grades, but she ripped the paper apart and told her that it's not true. She said, "I don't know what you're talking about, my son is perfect," and stormed out of the school. Parents like this are the reason why my son's teachers are always so fricking surprised when my wife and I tell them we'll gladly come to the school to punish and reprimand our son if he's acting up. We had a teacher once tell us she was almost stabbed for telling a girl to stop talking in class. The girl's father took this as an attack on his little princess who could do no wrong and showed up at the school with a knife. At parents' evening, "Oh, don't worry about my daughter, she's thick. She only needs to cook and clean. Now how's my little lad doing?" Multiple times over the school year, she emailed me with something like, "My child has been coming home saying she has no homework in your class. I believe she should be having homework from your class every day. Can you please give her some homework?" Okay. 1, there was actually homework. 2, the kid wasn't turning in any homework that quarter. And 3, the zeros were all reflected in the online grade report, which the parent apparently refused to read. Okay, I've reread it and it says she did this multiple times, so she kept forgetting these points? And then continually believed the kid when he said he didn't have any homework for his multiple classes? I mean, that's a problem, for both parties. Parents' evening last year. Year 10 or so 14 or 15-year-old kids. I told a woman that her son was doing really well in English and was very bright. She actually scoffed and said, "Really?" The boy was sat there too. I asked what he was thinking of doing when he left school, and he said he wanted to go to college to do A-levels. Kids at this school had ridiculously low aspirations, so this was music to my ears. Then his mother interjected and said, No, you're doing an apprenticeship, you're going to be a plasterer like your dad. Now, I have no problem with kids taking the vocational path as opposed to the academic one, but this kid had a shot, and he wanted to take that shot, but his own mum made him feel that there was no point. So sad. I was a 22-year-old female Asian middle school teacher in a district that was 99% black. You couldn't find any other person who looked quite like me in a 20-mile radius. Had a parent tell me that I couldn't possibly be a good influence on her child, after all, I do skanky things like nails and hair during my off hours. I guess the community's impression of Asian women was that we all worked at nail salons. The extremely skewed Asian stereotypes, however, worked in my favor for classroom management when my kids were convinced that I knew martial arts. Anytime I put on my teacher face when the students were misbehaving, one of the kids would exclaim, "Oh crap, Miss Soong is about to kung fu your butt." I never had too many problems with the kids that year. It's not your job to teach my son lessons. I kid you not, that's a verbatim quote. My mother is a retired English college teacher. Helicopter parents would regularly call to inquire about their kids' studies. She'd say, "That's confidential as per college policy. If you want to learn your child's grade, you're going to have to ask him or her. But I'm paying his or her tuition. It doesn't matter. Your child has a right to privacy. I can only discuss your child's grade with them. I'm calling the dean." By all means. Rinse and repeat over and over and over. This parent of a child with behavioral problems sends him to school with crap for breakfast every day. Fast food, Starbucks, cupcakes, you name it. We spent a lot of time trying to get her to even feed the kid breakfast in the first place because he refused to eat what was provided at school and was an absolute nightmare on an empty stomach. We're talking hide under the desk screaming all day levels of difficulty. So we didn't say anything for a while because at least he was on time and eating. Except then all the other students, who previously had no problem with the milk, cereal and fruit they got at school, started noticing the smug kid eating his delicious pancakes or whatever he had that particular day. It became a full-blown kindergarten hunger strike and it was miserable for us. When we asked the mother to please make an effort to feed him prior to arriving at school, she said she didn't have time unless we wanted him to be late every day. That was another problem that took forever to resolve. We reiterated that the school provided a perfectly healthy breakfast for free, and maybe she could make an effort to convince him to eat what everyone else got. He'd do literally whatever she asked. It was just a matter of staying for 10 minutes to eat with him, and she said, "I don't want him eating that sugary processed crap." So he took his McDonald's with an aide in the classroom for the rest of the year. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Kindergarten teacher here. Top questions and statements include, "Why isn't my child writing their name yet?" "I don't want my child wearing sunscreen." "We live in far north Queensland, Australia." "I took my child to the GP. He doesn't need a specialist." "My child is free range. I will not vaccinate." My wife is an elementary school teacher and suspected that one of her students might be autistic. The kid wouldn't communicate well at all and had issues with using the bathroom, showed other classic signs of being on the spectrum. My wife had a conference with the mother and explained that she'd like him to be evaluated, but the mother refused and said that if her son did have autism, my wife was the one who caused it. I'm not a teacher, but I coach my kids' youth sports teams. I once had a dad approach me and bribe me $50 to prevent a certain kid from playing in our upcoming flag football game. These were 6-year-old kids. The kid did make a costly mistake in the previous game, but the fact that this random dad was willing to pay me to bench the kid was mind-blowing. I should make it clear that I didn't accept the money. The dad attempted to bribe me and I turned it down for obvious reasons. My mum is frequently forced to let kids retake tests because they didn't do well on them. Not because the kids have any sort of problem, but because the parents whine and complain that their genius somehow got a failing grade on a test, so the school just gives in and lets the kids redo it. Third graders' parents come in with a notarized list of demands. Children in my class must be prohibited from bringing in gluten ever. They said they didn't want her to be left out because other kids were eating gluten. No, she didn't have celiac, it was just the family's personal choice. Then that I let their daughter choose who she sits next to each day. The class had a carefully coordinated seating plan, by the way. Also, that she be exempt from history class because she was too advanced for our history class but not advanced enough for an AP class. Long story short, they switched her to a private school before year's end. "Country, rodeo," this lady was calling her kids over. I was a high school varsity coach. I had a nice girl on my team with very little talent. After not starting, her mum came up to me and said, "It's really sad that Jenny isn't playing. How can you hold it against her?" I asked her what she was talking about, and her response, "Well, her dad's brother dated you in middle school and he broke up with you." Funny thing is, I have no clue who she was talking about. Oh boy, yeah, that's just so perplexing a thing to be blindsided by. If any given failed Tinder date's friends came up and just announced something about one of these people that hadn't worked out, it would be 10 seconds of stupid face from me. No, I don't know their last names and multitude of relatives, so please go away. My daughter's senior class voted a medically handicapped girl prom queen. I feared they were playing a joke on her, but my daughter insisted they all truly wanted her to win. Her family was poor, and the teachers chipped in and bought her a dress and shoes, stuff like that. The summer after graduation, I ran into the mother of another student in the class. This mother had pushed her daughter to be popular, bought her the best of everything, pushed her into being a cheerleader, and even went to the point of trying to set her up with boys in class. She actually chased them on her daughter's behalf. She's also a bit nuts, so I try my best to avoid her if I see her first. This day, I wasn't so lucky. Immediately, she started complaining about the student that was voted prom queen. She kept saying how her daughter should have been prom queen, the other students just voted for the other girl because they didn't want her daughter to get it, which was partially true to be fair. She went on and on about it being so unfair, that she was so mad, and then she started on how horrible it was to vote in a girl that was in special ed's class because she really didn't deserve to graduate. She was so poor that the teachers had to buy her dress, as if it were a sin to be poor. I finally got sick and tired of her crap, and I didn't like her anyway, and told her what I thought. I thought it was a very nice thing for the students to do. This may have been the only special moment that this girl will ever have. This witch's daughter will have many special moments. And it was so nice for the teachers to make sure she was dressed as nice as the other girls. I continued on at length, and this woman was stunned to say the least. She expected me to agree with her, but I was sick of her and how she was nearly pushing her daughter into any boy who'd date her and told her daughter's friends about her bedroom life and her crazy tirades every time I saw her. Now, when I run into her, we live in a small town, she doesn't speak and goes on her way. Thank goodness. The family was incredibly well off. The little girl wore Matilda Jane clothing every single day, which is expensive. The individual pieces are between $40 and $60. She almost never wore the same thing twice. Now compare her to a little boy in my class. His dad was in and out of jail. He always wore dirty jeans and the same pair of boots. His mum cut his hair and you could tell. But he was full of personality. All the kids wanted to play with him. He got a little rowdy and did some lightly inappropriate things like, "That's badass," or "What the hell?" But I would never peg him as a behaviorally challenged kid. Well, the rich mother of Matilda Jane girl approached my lead teacher and flat out demanded that her little girl never have contact with this boy because he was a bad influence. She wasn't to sit by him or speak to him or play with him. When we refused, she gave all of these instructions to her daughter, who would approach the little boy and announce over the whole class, "You have to leave here so I can play." People never cease to tee me off. I wasn't a teacher, but I was volunteering while in college to help a school district run a group field day. Me and another friend of mine were asked to sub in for a class-versus-class game of tug-of-war for first graders. One class had 6 less students. Of course, me and my friend hammed it up and acted like we were really struggling. Afterwards, one of the parents from the team we were on just started shouting at us, telling we should be ashamed for not trying our hardest and for faking. Oh yeah, her behavior and aggression vary with the phases of the moon. They said about their child who publicly threatened to kill me over unplugging her phone charger. I teach piano. I used to be a concert pianist. After I was teaching this 7-year-old girl for 2 weeks, the father pulls me aside after the lesson and asks, "So how long until she's as good as you? 6 months?" Had a star athlete who was being recruited by Ivy League schools failing my English class. On top of his generally poor academic performance, I also caught him cheating on a homework assignment, which he vehemently denied. His mum scheduled a meeting with an administrator and proceeded to berate me and to accuse me of discriminating against student athletes. I was the pep club sponsor at the time. Then she said her son would never cheat. I pulled out his homework and proceeded to read one of his answers. I, as a 16-year-old girl, Mum then begins yelling at him, "You can't even cheat right! What's wrong with you? How are you going to get into college if you can't cheat?" I was a daycare teacher, and this happened during the summer. We had 2 siblings coming in, and in their file it was clearly marked that they were both lactose intolerant. We take every allergy very seriously and do provide snacks to the children, so every box of snacks gets inspected to make sure the kids eating it will be fine. And we also provide alternative snacks just in case. So, this goes on for a week until I notice the kid is drinking milk out of a carton. I go to my supervisor and we ask the kid where she got the milk from. She's so little she doesn't really know, but she thinks she got it from her lunchbox. So now I'm confused. My supervisor is confused as well, and the kid is even more confused since she claims she drinks milk all the time. We get out her form and call the parent, and of course we can't get a hold of her. We agree to monitor the kid until her mum picks her up. She was fine, no tummy ache or anything, so we were carefully optimistic that we'd dodged a bullet there. Well, turns out she isn't lactose intolerant at all. They're not vegan either. Her mum just read somewhere that normal milk makes you smell bad, so she only gives her kids organic milk. It was the end of my shift, so I just left, and laughed my butt off all the way home. Well, at least this is just the funny kind of stupid rather than the permanently stunting my child's chances at life sort of stupid. Just read a little bit more whenever you hear about a newfangled health trend, parents. I was, for several years, a high school teacher here in the UK. At parents' evenings, you'd meet a variety of parents of all faiths and walks of life. For this particular evening, I was sat close to an English teacher friend of mine when the parents of Matt came and sat down. Matt was a pretty singular child. A late transfer, not many friends, horrendous condescending attitude to other students, but also a complainer that no one would work with him, or that no one was good enough when the few that volunteered stepped forwards. So the parents were always likely to be something. Matt's mother sat down and opened with the line, "Once this meeting is done, I'd like to make a formal complaint to your line manager and the head teacher." Usually this would make most teachers blood freeze, but my colleague had been teaching a while and worked to diffuse the situation. "Well, hopefully it won't come to that, but I'm sorry you're upset. What seems to be the problem?" "I refuse to have my son be made to read occult texts that encourage devil worship in class." Matt's mother was referring to the Year 7 syllabus text, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, which she promptly slammed down as evidence on the table. "I see," said my colleague, and proceeded to explain that the national curriculum had done an amount of pre-approval on this, and along with 99% of the country had no problem with it. Matt's mother had come prepared, however. "I don't care. He's not reading it. I demand that he be given something of more literary worth. I've checked the national curriculum guidelines, and Matthew will from now on be studying something respectable. I'd like you to separately teach him Macbeth, which is also on the approved reading list." What followed was, I think, only 2 minutes, but it felt like 10 as my colleague slowly and methodically listed all of the occult references in Macbeth, starting with the witches, then ghosts, and then throwing in the numerous murders, I think just for the F of it, to Matthew's mother. To her credit, she sat silently until he was done, at which point she mumbled something about still not wanting Harry Potter and left. I've never seen such a calm takedown of someone's bullcrap opinion before or since. What happened on a first date that made you decide, you know what, actually, I'm good? He used his pocket knife to cut me a slice of cake, and then later scraped some dirt clumps off his shoe with the same knife. I asked him if he ever cleaned his knife, and he replied, "No, why?" He also confessed he was madly in love with me the same day. We'd just met. One time I took this girl to dinner and she could not stop staring at our waiter. I'll grant her one thing. I'm a guy and I can admit this guy was probably hot for anyone who prefers men. Square-jawed and muscled college athlete type, I get it. But I did not appreciate the fact that she literally craned her neck every time the kitchen doors swung open to see if he was walking out. Eventually I gave her enough cash to pay for my part of the meal, told her I'd noticed, as though I couldn't have, suggested to her that she could get his contact info when she paid the bill, and then left. You wingmaned another bro on your own date? The next Bro Awards will feature you. He got us pulled over. The car was searched and he had a brick of some hardcore substances in the trunk. I almost got arrested. He finally vouched that this was a blind date and I was innocent. I mean, sounds like even if you wanted to, there couldn't have been a second date. He tried to change my order with the waitress because I didn't order what he'd recommended. Met a girl at a friend's party. We were both in our mid-20s, ended up spending 3 hours talking, and she was so funny, charming, gorgeous, and carefree. I asked her out and got a wonderful, "I would love to," from her. I showed up about 4 days later at the restaurant she'd picked, one within walking distance of her place. She arrived 5 minutes later. "Nice place," I say as I get the chair out for her. "Since it's so close, do you eat here often?" She scowls and responds, "You know, you ask too many fricking questions." I was floored. Everything continued downhill from there. Within about 20 minutes, she just got up and left. I felt as if she had failed to tell me the other night that she had an evil twin, and that's who showed up this evening. Later, when I ran into my buddy, I asked what the heck was up. "Oh yeah," he said, "she's a piece of work until she gets a few drinks in her. Then she's adorable. Thanks. Thanks a lot, buddy. I bet she's an alcoholic. She probably feels crummy as frick when she's sober." As a former alcoholic, this was my first thought too. Okay, well I was going to say that she was the opposite of most of us, who frequently turn into complete belligerent jerks when we drink, and say or do things we regret, but these last two commenters gave me some valuable insight. I hope she got to work on herself. Went to dinner with a girl who I'd been crushing on for quite some time. It seemed to be going well, and we ended up back at her place watching a movie or something. Out of nowhere, her boyfriend, of whose existence I was not aware, came back from out of town and stopped in unexpectedly. He and I had a super awkward conversation for a few minutes, and then the two of them disappeared into the other room for a minute or two. She came back and said something to the effect of, "I don't have a place for you. I'm sorry." I just kind of got in my car and drove home with one of the strangest feelings I'd ever felt. At some point, a few minutes into the journey, I couldn't contain myself and busted out laughing. I met a girl on a dating app way back in the day, and we ended up playing pool with her sister. About an hour in, my date starts chatting up a guy at the pool hall that she apparently knew. They disappear for a bit, and the sister comes up to me and sticks her tongue in my mouth. I leave and go to tell my date this isn't going to work, and she's outside making out with a dude she was talking to. To this day, I don't know if the sister trying to make out with me was to cover for her. Ugh. The guy told me he'd still be together with his kid's mum if she had apologized for what she did wrong. Out of curiosity, I asked what she did wrong. I was expecting something like she cheated. You know, something that actually needed apologizing for. Nope. Apparently she kept nagging one day and wouldn't shut up, so he tied her to a computer chair and went out for 3 hours and left her. I said it doesn't sound like she was the one who needed to apologize, and then I left. 2 times. There was Farmer Dude, who added me on MySpace. I'm showing my age here. We chatted a while. I can appreciate a country boy. Seemed pleasant. Went to meet at McDonald's. Okay, sure, I'm not that hard to please, let's get some Big Macs and chat. We talked for about 10 minutes and clearly it wasn't going to work. He was almost completely silent. Wouldn't ask questions, wouldn't eat, just sat there. I told him it was nice to meet him, but I had to go home. Later that night I got about 20 messages telling me exactly what he was into in the bedroom and how he wanted me to come over and throw up that mac sauce all over his junk. Yeah, that's a block from me. Then there was Counting Crows Dude. I met the guy on a Counting Crows online forum, again, showing my age, and he happened to live half an hour away. Sure, let's grab drinks at a local bar and see where it goes. I get there, can't find him anywhere, figured I was stood up, and then the lights dimmed and he walked out on stage, drunk as all heck, slurring every other word and proceeded to play Round Here, and stopped halfway through to chuck up on himself. Now I can never hear that song without cracking up. Maria came from Nashville with a suitcase in her. It's odd that both incidents involved hurling to some degree. He took it out. And I don't mean this in a funny, unexpected Seinfeld kind of way, although I suppose it is that. I mean, he leaned across the table and whispered, "I'm out." I said, "Excuse me?" For some reason, my first thought was out of the closet. He said, "Out, under the table. Look under the table." And like an idiot, I looked. Then he said, "That's what you do to me." I said, "And this is what you do to me," and I left. I'm a people pleaser, so to this day I'm proud of myself for walking away in the middle of dinner. She took her hands off the wheel and said, "You think I'm crazy?" I literally jumped out at the next light. Oh, this story's always fun to tell. Basically, we got back to her place after dinner and we were starting to have some fun on the couch. As things started escalating, she pulls out a giant glass jar, like the ones with the finger loop thing that pirates put rum in, half full of clear liquid. My dumb idiot self asked her if it was moonshine or vodka or something, and then she proceeded to explain that it was pure GHB and that she has a thing about getting wasted off it before doing the deed. And she said that with a completely serious face. For those of you who don't know, GHB is a substance frequently used by those trying to perform the unspeakable act on dates. She then went to the restroom and I noped out of there so fast that I practically levitated off the couch. Never spoke to her again. I picked her up and she asked me if we could stop by her mum's house so she could run in and grab something. I said sure. Made the stop. She went inside. 5 minutes later, she comes out hustling towards the car with a car seat and her mum chasing her, yelling. She opens the car door, throws in the car seat, which I now see has a baby in it, and starts yelling at me to drive. I freaked out and just turned my car off and took the keys out of the ignition. Her mum called the cops and they came and questioned all of us for a good while. Turns out she had lost custody due to substance use and was trying to use me as a way to get her kid back. We never made it to dinner and I just went home after the cops left. Wow, I've heard people going on dates for free meals or to make someone jealous. I've never heard of someone taking someone on a date to act as a getaway driver while they acted in contempt of court, though. So well done on getting that rare achievement. Your Steam profile will update with it soon. Happened to my sister, but they found out the guy had the same uncommon last name as her. Then when she asked where he was from, it was from the same small town that our great-grandparents are from. They awkwardly laughed and just immediately ended the date. She kept writing to her friends on WhatsApp a play-by-play of the date instead of listening to me, so I stood up, paid for my dinner, and left because I found it disrespectful as frick. I met this girl on the apps, and we're talking and she invites me over hours after matching. Alright, sure, things are alright through text. Her mum's there and is messed up, like mixing painkillers and alcohol messed up. She's at the table just mumbling and dozing off and asking me effed up stuff. Then her sister and sister's boyfriends are there and they're drunk and having a screaming match fight while we're all just talking and hanging out at the table. The girl I'm on the date with seemed more normal than the other three, and most of the time she's talking about her 9 or 10-year-old daughter and is complaining about how she lives in another state and how she's never had custody of her, and complaining about how we lived in a screwed-up state that always gives custody to the fathers. Which is a lie. I live in Colorado and I never meet any divorced dads with full custody unless the mum straight up left and even lived with my mum after my parents divorced when I would have been better off with my dad. So I leave and she asks me, how about a second date? And I tell her, sorry to be blunt, but that was a crap show and I was very uncomfortable and I don't think we'll align. She goes off on me about how everyone has a crazy mum, I'm normal, and how drunk people fight, it's what they do. And then finally, and here's the clincher, how I sound like Child Protection Services and that I was a freaking weirdo, and started hurling insults at me, and then said I should have disclosed my medical condition. I have no clue what she was talking about. It didn't need to be like that. I would have picked her up, taken her to dinner and a movie or walk or literally anything. But nope, she straight up told me to come to her house with her substanced-up mum, drunk sister, and boyfriend with zero warning. Ooh, mine's a bit fresh. I was asked when I'd get a real career. I love what I do. I'm a union stagehand in a major entertainment city. I've been in my industry for over 20 years, toured the country, toured the world, and make a comfortable living. Yeah, no, that's pretty demeaning, and I'm out. He told me that he'd been kicked out of his church for being caught in bed with someone underaged, but reassured me that it totally wasn't what it looked like. Her kid called me daddy. Told me that aliens cause jet lag and that I've the ghost of a fisherman following me around named Samuel, on top of the other 20 bat crap things she said at dinner. This was last night, by the way. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. He just kept making a weird amount of jokes about tapeworms. Also, this happened while we were eating sushi, just in case anyone was wondering. She clicked her fingers at the waitress. Stunning but vapid as frick. He insisted on paying for our dinner instead of going Dutch, and then totally stiffed the server. I tried to leave a tip and he got angry at me because he was paying and it was his decision to tip or not. Ooh, I have a wee collection from the lads I've dated over the years. He tried to force a kiss. Another who tried to get me to marry him the next week. No, he wasn't an immigrant. Another who said women were stupid and would believe anything he told them. I'm a woman, man. One who said it was okay to drown puppies and it was actually humane. And then there was the guy who swore that it was impossible to get acquired immunodeficiency syndrome if he was straight. I found out a week later that he knew the whole time he was human immunodeficiency virus positive. That's just some of them. There are various different men throughout my lifetime, and in no particular order, I was just writing them down as they came to mind. Can't believe I nearly forgot that last guy. Scariest of them all. He tried way too hard to get me to go home with him. I'm glad common sense won out that day. I was 16 and he was 18. He referred to every woman as the C word, and we aren't in a country where that's common and harmless. His ex was apparently a C word, his aunt was a bunt, some random author he was telling me about for some reason was also a shunt, stuff like that. The C word doesn't really bother me, but the way he said it was very gendered and angry. After that, he decided to argue with me about sports and politics and berate me for my choices in those areas. No need for a second date after that. That guy was a funt. Being told off the bat that the welts on my crotch aren't contagious really put me off them. I went on a date with a woman from the office. I thought we had good chemistry and got along well. She couldn't find her phone, so I tried calling it, and someone from the restaurant answered. I went back in for her to get it, and the waiter showed me I was saved in her contacts under free food. I guess I'll repost this here. She kept talking about the emergency eggplants she had stashed around the city. She was like, I've been really busy with grad school, but I don't go without. I have plenty of emergency sausage around town, if you know what I mean. And when I say she kept going on, I mean she kept going on. She was telling me about the 2 guys downtown, 3 in the suburbs, 1 near campus, and 2 in her apartment complex. It honestly sounded like I was new to town, and she was giving me a rundown of all the best places to visit. It was just weird. I was newly out, and I had a crush on her for ages, so when she asked me out, I was so excited. She was pretty, smart, very laid back, and had a great sense of humor, so things were going great initially. End of the date comes around and she very casually drops the bomb on me that she's involved in an open investigation for vehicular manslaughter. She even hinted that it was purposeful and didn't seem to regret anything. That was the end of that. Ow! I think I just experienced sympathetic conversational whiplash for you. My goodness, I can't imagine going from being stoked that your crush asked you out to suddenly going, oh, they killed someone and may have done it intentionally. Lordy lord. I met her parents on the first date and she was terrified of me. Most awkward date ever. He said nothing. I get that he was nervous, but I was engaging. I asked questions that should have led to at least a few sentences of conversation, but no, one-word answers for everything. It was dinner and a movie, so our only opportunity to talk was dinner. It was like pulling teeth. No thanks, no second date. Nothing obvious or overt, but from the minute we sat down to eat, the hair on the back of my neck stood up and I felt unsafe. He was polite, listened, very polished, but I just couldn't shake that feeling. I drove to the restaurant to meet, so he didn't know where I lived. After dinner, he asked for another date and I just said, no, I don't think we're a good match. I gave him money to pay for my half, said goodbye, and when I got to the door, I turned around and he was staring at me with an expression I never hoped to see again. I ran to my car, moved it to another spot, and waited until he left before I left, so he couldn't follow. The restaurant was on an isolated road, so that was safer than having him catch up to me. Found out about a year later he was sent to prison for the unspeakable act against 2 different women. It happened on first dates. Never used a dating site again. Trust your instincts, ladies. It was my first date. I was 17 and worked as an office assistant's helper. The guy, who was 20, also worked there. I don't remember what his job title was. He asked me to a drive-in movie. He came to the house and met my mum. Did the whole song and dance to her about taking good care of me, get me home on time, all that crap. I was still nervous though, so I arranged with 2 friends to go to the same movie in their car. My date didn't know about them. They parked 3 cars down from us. After we parked, the guy is telling me to relax. He just wanted company for the movie. He respected me. So I'm thinking, cool. The movie started. I don't think the opening credits had finished and he was all over me. It was like he grew 4 extra arms in seconds. I pushed him off me and said, what the frick? He apologized and said he was sorry. He thought I'd like it and he couldn't help himself because I was so cute or whatever. I told him I didn't like it and to keep his hands to himself. I get maybe 2 drinks of my soda down and he tries again. Now I'm angry. I get out of the car, throw my drink at him and walk off. I go to my friend's car and get in. The guy didn't see where I went because he was dealing with dripping soda on him and his car. My friends and I left. The following Monday at work was really awkward and he avoided me like the plague. This is why to this day I've never again dated anyone I've worked with. She asked me if I could clean her pet rat cage or hold the rat while she cleaned it. Also listed a number of handyman tasks she needed me to tackle. The girl who spent the first half of the dinner date talking about her irritable bowel syndrome and then switched to her love for God after the main course. She looked nothing like her photos, smelled of cat pee-covered taquitos. We were at the park and saw some girls playing softball and she said, Those girls look like special ed with those helmets. Like, frick. I'm always down to give someone a chance, but just yikes. I made an excuse to leave. My car smelled for like 2 days after that. He threw a temper tantrum because the restaurant he wanted to go to was closed due to the tropical storm that was going on. Sad, because I was having a great time walking around Manhattan while the storm raged. I had every intention of going home with him until that tantrum. She wouldn't stop going on and on about how much she wanted a baby, called it her little creation and how she wanted multiple, tried to convince me to come back to her place for some fun. I dropped her off and dipped right away. She texted me every now and then afterwards, trying to meet up again. Hell no. We went to her place to watch movies and we chose Kung Fu Panda 2. From the moment it began, she proceeded to cackle at every single joke. Anything that could even be perceived as mildly funny set her off like the Wicked Witch of the West. I know some people have interesting laughs, and it wouldn't have been so bad if it wasn't constant from beginning to end. After that, she put on Iron Man and same thing, witch cackling the entire movie. There's a point in the movie where a character's phone goes off and the ringtone is an old Iron Man theme, which made me chuckle, at which she turned to me and says, "You laugh at all the weirdest parts." The second the movie was over, I got out of there and didn't see her again. I hold out hope that her saying that was some kind of self-aware joke, but then again I do get the admittedly shallow urge to run when someone laughs constantly and in an unattractive way. I'm not proud of it, but it is a whole thing. The date felt more like a job interview to fill a position rather than an actual date. He gave off a vibe of someone who wasn't into getting to know me as a person, but just listed his wants and needs. So at the end of the date, he asked me how I thought it went, and I said I didn't feel a click or a match. And he said, yeah, he was missing the wow factor. So I laughed my butt off, slightly offended, in the car on my way home. Gosh, I had no idea I was auditioning for a contest. I was happy we only went out for drinks, but even that felt a bit too long. Took her to dinner and then took her to a late-night car meet. Upon arriving to the meet, she started crap with several other girls she had beef with at her school, and she hasn't talked to me since high school. We were well into our 20s, she was even older than me. I don't get how some people make high school beef their entire personality for years. Oh, just so many. But I'll say the one where the guy was kind and polite, but wanted to move way too fast. I'm not talking about bedroom stuff. Grabbed my chin and tried to turn my head for a kiss while we were watching a movie. It was Surrogates with Bruce Willis, if you're wondering. He didn't try again after I pulled away, though. He also mentioned he should get to know the state where I grew up and where my family lived since he'd be meeting them soon. He'd also catfished with a pic of his older brother, which was sad to me since he was really cute himself. He insisted on walking me to my car. I'd parked near the attendant in a garage. Glad I made that decision, and while I was getting in, he asked if he could tell his mum he had a girlfriend. We were both in our early 20s, by the way. Poor guy. Since he was just over-enthusiastic and not an outright creep or jerk, I did email him telling him why there wouldn't be a second date, saying he came on too strong, but I wished him well. I hope he found someone. I also kind of wondered if it was a cultural thing I wasn't aware of. He was Indian, but I can't say either way. One time I went on a date with a girl, and during the date, she started talking about future plans with me. She was talking about how we're going to have kids together and how we're going to go on trips with my brother and his wife. I was in my mid-20s and I'd just started my career when this happened, so of course this freaked me out. Who jumps to those kinds of conclusions during the first date? It was super awkward because she worked with my mum and kept asking about me. What was it like on your first night as a homeless person? I was about 9 years old and my mum said we were going on a camping trip. I didn't really suspect anything as it was summertime and we went camping a lot when I was younger, although I did wonder why we were packing so much stuff. After a few weeks of camping, I started to complain, but my mum insisted that it was good for us to get in touch with nature, stuff like that. Then school started and we were still camping, and we kept camping for another 6 months. When we finally got a house, my mum cried with joy, and we don't camp anymore. To me, that reads as your mother trying to protect you as best as she could and keep things positive for you, staying strong in the face of terrible circumstances. Good for her. I remember being really hungry and acting weird because of the low blood sugar, almost delirious. This was when I made a futile attempt to run away from an awful home situation with no money. I ended up going back because of that. I was 13 when my parents kicked me out and told me that they no longer wanted anything to do with me. I was terrified to visit a shelter because I'd known some foster kids and the whole system scared me, plus I wanted to continue going to the same school. I didn't want to lose my friends either. The scariest part at that age was really just finding out what I was hoping to eat. There had been a dilapidated trailer just minutes down the road from my dad's place, so I stayed in that. I don't think it really hit me until I had to choose one night between food and blankets, because the temperature was expected to drop down into the mid-30s, and I only had one somewhat thin blanket at that point. The next day I put on my best attire, which was nothing impressive, and asked for a job at Long John Silver's. I lied and told them I was 15, and I worked 5 days a week rushing over after school. I ate more unhealthy than I have since to save money for some form of shelter, which came in the form of a '91 Toyota Camry that I purchased out of the thrifty nickel for $300. I loved that clunker, plus heating myself was much easier in it. From there, it was mostly uphill. I found an older lady willing to rent me her garage without any sort of credit check. Took a couch off the side of the road to sleep on. I even had internet in there, where I mostly read scary stories all night. I wish video streaming services had been a thing back then. I just kinda learned to roll with the punches. My childhood wasn't normal. It was downright terrifying a good chunk of the time, but it is what made me who I am today. I don't know that I could deal with that situation now as a grown man. It's downright impressive that you managed to survive, but also progressively better your situation. Well done. Also, the fact that it's implied that you finished school like this is a whole extra level of wow. I was homeless for a couple of months a year or so ago. I had a car and a low-paying job, so I lived in the woods in a tent for a bit. The first night was miserable. I ended up sleeping really uncomfortably in the passenger seat of my car, and it was a really cold night. After that, I got a tent and slept on an old climbing pad I had. The first night was hell, but the next several weeks were actually not so bad. I had a spot in the woods where I was well hidden and I could cook over a fire. I really didn't have it that bad, but it gave me quite a bit of sympathy for people who really do end up on the streets in much more desperate situations. Stuff is not easy. I was only homeless for about 6 weeks at 36 years of age. After several years of depression and anxiety slowly eroding my resources, relationships, and general will to try anymore, I ended up having a final blowout with my girlfriend, who reasonably couldn't handle me anymore. I started sleeping at work, which wasn't even a full-time job. The delicate part was not getting caught, and the freedom from the extremely unhealthy state my relationship had been in kept my mind away from the absolute abject terror that was hiding beneath the surface. The scary part of homelessness for me was the growing sense that if I fell any further, I'd probably never get back up. It takes resources to be clean, fed, and rested, and if you aren't those things, it's very hard to get the resources, let alone find the will to try. But that first night was all triage, all focused on trying to be sure the second night wasn't going to be on the street. I pulled it off for 6 weeks, and that time actually saved my life. I was away from conflict, intimately connected to how dire my circumstances had become, and forced into a very regular schedule. Routine is really good for me, but nigh impossible in a depressive state. I was without bills, was able to save enough for a damage deposit and rent. I still struggle with depression in a pretty serious way, but the animal terror of having nowhere and no one really seared itself into me. A better motivation would be the future I want rather than the future I fear. But as it stands, I at least have a motivator strong enough to escape the incredible gravity of mental illness. Sleeping in my car wasn't that bad. It was summer, so it was pretty warm, which was my biggest issue. I showered in the gym, spent most of my day at the library before going to work. For the first few nights, it wasn't bad. However, one night, police found me sleeping in my car and escorted me to the local homeless shelter, which was one of the most terrifying nights of my life. While I was there, laying in a bunk bed, a huge argument broke out because one guy broke out some crystal, wouldn't share it with a second guy, and then a third guy got angry and started screaming at them to be quiet because he needed to sleep. Since this is coming up a lot, people keep asking how it was legal that the police escorted me to the shelter. I don't know the legality of the issue. What I can say is I was woken up by a knock on my window to see 4 cops, 2 cop cars, and they were shining those super bright flashlights through my windows at me, and I didn't even think of arguing with them. When you're a teenager, it seems kind of cool to sleep in a car, on the couch or floor of a friend or acquaintance, or for your dad to scam a rented apartment for a month or 2 without paying for it. Moving around every few months, carrying everything you can in an old Honda Civic, seemed like an adventure. We once moved a couch across town in it. We must have looked like a couple of idiots. Once, after a few months of staying in a place where we had no furniture, were sleeping on the floor, the carpet of which was so flea-infested you could literally see the fleas hopping around, the landlord got so frustrated with us basically squatting in his property that my dad had promised to pay and never did, that the landlord removed the front door. We went out to scam some food from somewhere and came back to find no front door, which in retrospect is a pretty awesome way to get someone out of your property. One of the ways we scammed food would be to go to the breakfast buffet at a fancy hotel, tell the server we had a room there, eat a ton of food and just walk out. If you go to a basic place like a Motel 6 with the waffle maker and everything, and no one's working there besides someone at the front desk and someone coming around cleaning, it's pretty easy. But do remember that you're stealing and you can get in trouble for it. This was also kind of fun, but looking back, it is kind of a messed up way for a dad to treat his teenage kid. Slept in my vehicle, couch surfed with a friend, squatted in an unused trailer, all while still working at Walmart. Saved enough to get a crappy apartment and just kept going from there. First night, my wife and I ended up sleeping outside. We slept in a local park that I knew about. We'd come down from the countryside with a few rands, enough for a meal maybe, and hoped to stay with a friend. He was unable to give us a place to stay, so we had to sleep outside. After the insecurity of that first night, I told my wife that we had to find a safer place to sleep, so we climbed up the slopes of Table Mountain, about a 1-hour walk away, and found an obscured spot amongst some bushes and trees. We cleared that out with sticks and rocks, made it a bit habitable, and then went to the city looking for work. We'd spend the day going from one place to the next, looking for work until it started growing dark. Then we'd head up the mountain to our little spot for the night. Did that daily for a month until we were able to secure a small shack room in the townships, where we stayed for another few months until I got a job offer. It was my wife's temp waitering jobs that kept us fed while I was looking for work. Biggest challenge was mental, keeping focused, clean, looking presentable, and just making my job to be looking for a job. There have been times in my life where I've struggled to find literally any job from the comfort of my little apartment with working hot water and electricity for months on end. I do not know how you did this from your car or tent, and hats off to you for your relationship surviving this. Clearly a testament to your strength as a couple. I slept in a near-empty garage block, put blankets over my front and rear seats like a tent, and had a duvet to keep me warm. I was absolutely fine until I woke up in the morning and had a wee behind my car, and noticed the white van next to me had an electric plug in it. Someone was sleeping in the van. I slept there a few more times, kinda creepy, but it also kinda made me feel safer too. It was terrifying and cold and hungry. I didn't sleep a wink, I adapted over time. Extremely steep learning curve to surviving homelessness, nothing really prepares you for it. It wasn't awful until it sunk in that it wasn't going to change anytime soon. At first it's just shocking, like blank mind shocking. How did I get to this point? Then it's scary and surreal. And I had my kid with me, so I was busy keeping him safe and fed. Awful came about a month into it. And yes, we have an apartment now and all is well, thank you. I kept waking up in the middle of the night and I'd start walking home. I'd get a few steps and then stop and realize I had nowhere to go and turn back and walk over and lay on the ground. The ground is very cold and I felt a lot of shame. When I was a teenager, I had lots of problems with my mum. I pretty much chose to be homeless. I slept at a Catholic church across from my high school so I could still make it to school and graduate early. I remember really feeling sad because I slept where they put people's ashes, and I remember being so sad that those people could comfort me in death more than anybody alive. I used to talk to them. If there's camera footage, I think I'd look insane on it. I never realized how alone I was in the world until I was homeless. And I never realized how cold concrete can be. It chills you right to your bones and is painful. I started being homeless at 19. A previous foster parent put me out for coming home from college one night, and I'd called up a friend last minute. When I started to realize I wouldn't be able to crash or stay anywhere, I'm fairly certain I started to dread and spiral into a constant underlying depressive state. All I could think about was, am I going to die like this? Do I matter? Will no one help me? I'm sad. I'm scared. I don't want to feel like I have to beg. What if I'm stuck like this? Is this really my life right now? 19 through 26 was a very challenging time. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I didn't really realize what was going on. I was about 6 or 7 at the time. Dad said we were just going to go for a drive and to throw my backpack with all the clothes I could fit and one toy. Mum was just crying. Me and my brother sat in the back seat. He was a bit older and was holding our Sega Genesis and looking scared. We drove for a little while, it was already getting dark, and we parked in front of a Walmart and Dad said he had to rest for a while. It was the first of many, many nights we slept in the car. I remember one of my parents was always awake, with their hands in their coat pocket. Looking back, it was obvious they had a weapon for protection and were sleeping in shifts. I was getting high, so it didn't really sink in until I was broke and dope sick. Then the desperation started. Going to gas stations, jumping car to car, asking for money, stealing what I had to. It was a miserable existence. There are so many things you don't think about when you're not homeless. Taking a shower, washing your clothes, And the boredom, hours upon hours of nothing to do, and the constant noise. There was nowhere to go where it was truly quiet. Fortunately, I eventually got arrested for shoplifting and reached out to family who helped me get back on my feet. I was once fooled by an ex into moving back in with her after a breakup. After a couple of weeks, she decided to have a yard sale. This yard sale ended up featuring most of my stuff. Then, with money in hand, she decided it was time I went back to my place. My place, which had nothing in it. My place which I'd given notice on. My place which was already awaiting a new renter. I spent my last 2 weeks sleeping on a hardwood floor using sweaters as blankets, and then when the day came to vacate, I threw all of my clothes in a plastic bag and just started walking. I was destitute. I had absolutely nothing and no idea where to start. It was right in the Canadian winter, so staying outside would be a death sentence in many cases. So I did the only thing I could think of. I sat in a 24-hour Tim Hortons. I used what little money I had to purchase small coffees once in a while, so I at least had an excuse to sit there. Eventually my cash ran out and I thought for sure I'd get the boot. Then one of the ladies working the counter came over and just handed me my usual order. I guess she probably figured out what was going on and felt bad. The second time she did it, I struggled not to cry. I'm pretty thankful because my next idea if I was asked to leave was to politely refuse and sit and wait for the cops. It would have been better than freezing to death. Morning came and I'd saved only enough to catch a single bus. I headed downtown to try and find some friends. I did, and I couch surfed between a lot of them. I never spent a night out in the cold, but I spent many in a coffee shop or bouncing between friends. It was the worst my depression ever got and the closest I ever came to just finishing things. My life is like 1,000,000 times better now, but I'll never forget how worthless I felt. I'm just glad you made it through the other side. You really got the best and worst of people there. An ex who was either purposefully destroying your life or just making a ploy to get some cash, and then strangers and friends who extended you little kindnesses until you got back on your feet. Well done. My parents didn't tell us that they lost their house to the bank. One day we left everything but a few clothes and essentials. I remember sitting in the car, watching the world outside, and I felt extremely alone. The drive just went on endlessly unless we had to go to the bathroom. We ate some cracker things and had water at rest stops from bathrooms. Sleeping in a car seat that you couldn't lay back on was really hard to adapt to, so I didn't sleep for the first couple of nights. It really sucked, but as the days turned into weeks, things just kind of became the new normal. We'd drive around for hours and sometimes camp out at campgrounds or roadsides instead of sleeping in our woefully tiny car. This completely ruined our education because we couldn't stay at any school long. I loved school for the food, and I'd steal paper, pens, and books sometimes, so I had something to do. My mother eventually said she'd just homeschool us, but that was soon dropped for us kids to do for ourselves. I was able to almost get my GED before a sickness stopped me, but some of my younger siblings only have an education from 3rd or 4th grade. When it was winter, I remember having to take showers from those hand pumps at the camping ground. The water was so cold it would instantly burn and numb up from anything it touched. We also didn't have any winter clothes, so most of us would wrap up in our old blankets and layers of clothes. We rarely had any food, and I resorted to eating some of my clothes, paper, grass, or tiny pieces of my own skin to try to not feel hungry. Once we had pancakes as our main food for months. I cannot eat pancakes anymore because the very smell of them makes me sick now. Other food we got was ramen and rarely a hot dog. I'm not sure how my parents managed to get the food or even have money, even if it was very little. Maybe from a food pantry. Cooking food on the fire wasn't that hard to do, and I learned how to make a fire and gather what a fire needs. If we got sick, we never went to a doctor, just had to hope it got better. We were on and off homeless until I was in my late teens when my grandmother brought my parents a house for us all to live in. It feels so strange to actually have a home and even food. I still have a hard time knowing a lot of social norms because of the isolation from homelessness. You just do what you can to survive. I still resent my parents for avoiding any help from the government or going to any homeless shelters. They lost our house because of stupid spending and going into bankruptcy. Their habits never changed. We'd get a place to live for maybe a year or two, then lose it because my parents were terrible at managing money. I don't recall my very first time exactly. I do remember looking for a friend that was homeless, and his friends ended up watching over me. Everyone was drunk except me. I didn't sleep. More recently, less than a month ago, I lost my housing and everything I own. I'm alone this time. I sleep during the day and browse Reddit at night. I was homeless for 10 years the first time, and I am terrified now. I packed 3 bags, one with clothes, blankets, and a pillow, one with food and one with books. I couch surfed for a little bit, a week or 2 with each of my friends, slept in my car while I had it. I used other people's kitchens to cook stolen food and ate food that 7-Eleven threw away. Every morning at about 6 a.m., night shift would throw out all of the food that had sat too long. I'd wait for the clerk to go back inside and then fish the bag out of the dumpster. I slept outdoors in some parks after the car got towed, and I used my friend's goodwill. Got really good at 5 to 10 minute wash-ups in public bathrooms with hand soap. Teeth, armpits, under chest, and butt. Let me tell you how nasty hand soap tasted. I'd occasionally wash my underwear with hand soap real quick too, and dry it with the hand dryers. I'd generally use 2 24-hour McDonald's at about 4 a.m. so no one would walk in on me. What I'd do is panhandle outside a subway station for enough money for a smack rock, an egg of blow, a syringe, a sandwich, and tea. If you wear semi-professional clothes and say, "Oh my god, my purse got stolen, does anyone have any spare change?" you get more money than just asking and wearing, like, jeans. I'd then go to McDonald's, order the sandwich and say I had to use the bathroom. Then I'd do a wash-up, grab the sandwich and eat it on the way to the next McDonald's. At the second McDonald's, I'd order a tea and ask for lemon juice, pocket the juice and ask to use the restroom. In the restroom, I'd use the juice to break down the smack, mix it with the blow and shoot up. Then, sadly, I'd usually actually use the bathroom in a park or something. Did this for years until I accidentally got pregnant. I'd be gosh darned if I screwed up my kid by being a junkie, so I cold turkeyed everything. I own a house now and I'll be 14 years clean on November 18th. My ex-wife made up a bunch of crap to get a restraining order. I got served at work while she simultaneously shut off my phone service and locked me out of our shared bank account. This was January 7th, 2016. I had a t-shirt and slacks to wear for clothes and nowhere to sleep. My car didn't have working heat. Thank God for my parents who got me a hotel, new phone, and some money for clothes. I ended up living in an extended stay hotel for 2 months while I looked for an apartment and got my affairs in order. The restraining order was dismissed, the divorce went to trial, and I got the house and the kids. Well, that must have sucked for your ex-wife, but yeah, when you lie to get your way and presumably end up in contempt of court, things don't tend to go your way when evidence starts going up. And then, how much mercy can you really expect from the man you've basically made homeless for a while? I lived at school until I dropped out due to a bunch of personal reasons piling up. My mum was mad that I dropped out and wouldn't even talk to me the first few days after, and my relationship with my father is complicated or non-existent. I took the train to my hometown, even though I didn't know what I'd do or where I'd go when I got there. I ended up staying the first night in my brother's room, not quite an apartment, just the one room with a kitchen and bathroom he shares with like 5 other people. After that, I posted to social media that I was in an unfortunate situation, and a friend I'd lost touch with, despite once being very close, offered that I could stay with him and his fiancée until I got a place of my own. I never actually had to sleep outside, and I found an apartment after about a month, so all in all, I was pretty lucky with how it turned out. Oh, and my mum and I are cool now, and my dad and I are also trying to rebuild our relationship after he finally divorced his no longer new wife. I've always referred to her as his new wife, even though it's been over a decade. I was homeless for a little while in the 80s. It's terrifying at first. You feel so unsafe. I was a teenager, and I wasn't willing to close my eyes and sleep on a park bench alone. So I went to a local shelter and lied about my age. They forced me to shower and do a pee test. It turns out the women in that shelter were scarier than the street, so the next night I didn't go back. I slept in a park, but ultimately made squatter friends and stayed with them. It was very much a community, and I felt safe and even loved there. The biggest problem with being homeless in the city is no one wants to let you use the bathroom. Even park bathrooms are locked. Squat peeing in between cars can be done quickly and undercover, but when you get your time of the month, it's a nightmare. These days I have stability, so I never pass a homeless person without buying them some food or giving them a bit of money. And if they use it for substances or booze, I honestly don't care. Living on the street is hard. Drink if you need to, my friend. What's a dark, secret practice in your profession? Have you ever started filling out a form for a quote on something, like an insurance website or literally anything online, and then changed your mind and said, "Nah, I don't want to give them my personal information," and then abandoned the form before pressing submit? If you think that stopped them from getting your personal info, it didn't. Most companies looking to capture leads will capture your info in real time as you enter it into a form. The submit button is just there to move you to the next step, not to actually send your information to the company. Pretty much all of the high-end, handmade in Australia jewelry in Australian stores is made at a secret factory in Bali. All the clients have to show an established business and sign confidentiality agreements. Customs broker here. Every day, hundreds of thousands of customers and air shipments arrive into United States territory. The value of customs entries entered every day is staggering. When we get licensed to be a customs broker, we're trained and tested not just on knowledge, but ethics. We even take a pledge to partner with CBP to uphold the law and cooperate with them should we come across anything suspicious. Why so much emphasis on this? Customs can't actually screen everything coming in. I'm oversimplifying here, but CBP basically works on the honor system. You file an entry saying what the shipment is, and they just take your word for it and release it. This happens hundreds of thousands of times a day. Maybe at best, customs could screen 3 to 7% of what's coming in. The rest of it's just waved through. I work at a county jail in the Midwest. The most disturbing thing about jail is the terrible loop some inmates get stuck in. Many inmates have mental issues and get caught in this loop where they can't have any clothes or items because they'll try to self-delete and they're locked in their cell for 23 hours a day. This makes them more angry, so when they're finally let out, they lash out at staff and they're locked down again. It's a vicious cycle for a whole lot of inmates, and it makes a lot of mental illnesses a whole lot worse. Staff can't do anything, though, because if they allow the inmate with mental illness to socialize, then they personally risk a lawsuit from those around them because of the individual's history of violent outbursts. Majority of hospitals won't take them because they won't risk their staff, so they're just stuck in a room and their only help is consistent medication stabilizing them. Not currently my profession, but ghostwriters in fiction. John Grisham, Danielle Steele, James Patterson, Jeanette Avanovich, ones like those. All of those big names with a New York Times bestseller every year use ghostwriters who are never credited or mentioned. It's barely even a secret. It's weird how being an author can go from something that you go from working super hard and passionately in for no money to getting to the point where you're just being paid to have other people write your books for you. Is it just something that can happen after your first bestseller? And when's George R. Martin finally going to throw in the towel and use one who can at the very least approximate an ending to A Song of Ice and Fire for us? There is a problem in substance addiction treatment in the United States called body brokering. Treatment can be very expensive, and insurance companies pay a lot of money for a patient to be there. Treatment centers will hire body brokers to find addicts with the best, highest-paying insurance and entice them to check in to the specific center. The treatment center then gives the broker a commission from the insurance money. This can go as far as body brokers literally putting more substances into the hands of some addicts before they come in, because the higher the levels in your system upon admittance, the more and longer the insurance company will pay to the treatment center. Brokers will also hire other addicts in a pyramid scheme kind of way to check into the treatment center, make friends with the other patients, and upon discharge encourage relapse so they come back to treatment. So you know the people who write instruction manuals or user guides and things you buy? Half the time they've never even seen or touched the product. Some dude just sends us pictures, a rough description of how it's supposed to work, and that's it. Sometimes we lick artifacts to quickly determine if they're bone or pottery. Bone sticks and pottery doesn't. Then we tap them on our teeth to determine if they're pottery or a rock. Rock will hurt and pottery won't. Archaeology. If it has to be accessed regularly in an IT setting, it's not secure. Not unless you're in an industry that actually polices it. Yes, people are dumb enough to pick up USB thumb drives they find on the ground. The nicer and newer it is, the more likely it'll get plugged in. Also, if you're looking to verify the security of your vendors, don't announce your visit. At a very large pizza chain restaurant that remains widely popular, we had these perforated pans for thin crusts and stuffed crust pizzas. They'd get washed in the dishwasher by the hundreds per day, and at least half would still have burnt cheese and stuff on them. Well, they were just stacked to dry. When making new pizzas in those pans, sometimes the pans that were left to dry overnight grew bits of mold around the burnt cheese. We were just told to put the dough on top, because otherwise we'd never keep up with the orders if we re-washed everything. The manager said, "Don't worry, it gets cooked." Oh god. I worked at a couple of pizza places, 2 big chain ones. At one of them, the grease was unreal. The dishwasher basically had to be scraped once a day to get the thick film off. They didn't have an actual dishwasher either, just made the drivers clean them, and the drivers didn't want to do the dishes, so they'd just toss them in there haphazardly. I can't tell you how many times I'd find pans with just a layer of oil in them still, and have to send a bunch of them back through. My husband worked for a short period long after I quit, and he said he caught one of the managers dipping plates in the sanitizing water and just sending them back out. Disgusting. The second big chain was all hand-washed and done properly, but I think that was specific to that particular store more than anything else. Sometimes librarians read the new books before registering them in the catalog for the public. Air traffic control. Cue the Breaking Bad jokes. A diagnosis of virtually any mental illness and a diagnosis of many physical conditions is disqualifying and will end your career. For that reason, people avoid doctors like the plague. It's like that in the reactor department in the US Navy as well. Undiagnosed and untreated mental illness? If it's not in your medical record, it doesn't officially exist, and therefore it's not a problem. Get treatment for your mental health problems? Now you're not allowed to do anything related to nuclear power anymore, and everyone hates you for not pulling your weight. And that's why I didn't re-enlist. Young kids talk to their teachers, coaches, counselors, and principals about their parents. Quite a lot. And kids pick up on all the dirty little secrets. Lots of performing musicians don't ever really get over stage fright. Many of them take beta blockers to help with nerves, although it's less about the mental side of it and more the fact that you physically can't perform if you get so nervous that your hands are shaking. That's what beta blockers help you with. You'll probably still feel anxious mentally, but any physical effects like shaking or sweating will be gone. It's not really a dark secret, as there's not usually bad side effects of beta blockers. But I guess some people might see that as cheating in their own way. Personally, I find it kind of inspiring knowing that lots of people struggle with the same thing as me, and there's a solution that isn't just suck it up and deal with it. I work in logistics, trucking, rail, ocean, and air freight. Everyone lies about everything all the time. Padding paperwork slows an auditor down. Every data point, all the minutiae of the calculations, unnecessarily dense explanations of statistical methods that go on at length with notes about distribution fitting. The auditors aren't usually very technical, so they stop at each spot along the way without realizing they can throw half the document out. If you're good, you can balloon a 30-page document into 100 in a matter of minutes. IT. Outages occur? Sure. Bugs happen too. Most of the time, though, these things are known and put off until they happen and are complained about. Good to know that the people running the world are basically just the same as the rest of us, to be honest, putting aside all the crap we should be doing until it's too big of a problem to ignore. Many hotels often sell rooms multiple times. I used to work in an airport hotel, knowing that chances are some guests won't arrive due to missed or delayed flights, so we sell even more rooms than we have. You have guests checking out from 2 or 3 a.m. due to early flights. Even though the room is technically still theirs, you quickly and sometimes poorly clean the room and tell the arriving unexpected guest or new booking that there's a random computer issue and to wait 20 minutes and then check them into the departed guest's room, praying. Multiple times I've had to run a kettle under a cold tap to hide the fact that the previous guest used it 15 minutes before the new guest arrives. Airlines do this crap with airplanes too. Once I had a connecting flight while heading back to college, which was, luckily, not a long flight and I had plenty of time. They pulled this crap and initially wanted someone to forgo their seats for a $50 coupon. I let it go up to a $250 direct check and then volunteered, and they still tried to go with credit towards a ticket. I only accepted the check and then got paid that amount for a couple of hours watching Netflix in the airport. Many bills are literally written by lobbyists or special interest organizations. I've seen my boss give bill languages to a state legislator and then found the same language in print a few days later several times. The bill may change in committee, but usually not drastically against the original intent. How many people work with children, like teachers or childcare workers, who don't follow confidentiality guidelines, gossiping about families with co-workers, talking about children's home situations, creeping families' social media, stuff like that. Eesh. You do not want to know how long food sits on the loading dock before it gets into a cooler. I work at a theme park and we use codes with a number for a situation that could happen in the park to not create panic. We also use codes for some category of people, like code 25 means there's a fire, code 20 is for mentally disabled people. We also use hand signals sometimes for some situations. When we take x-rays of your pelvis, we can see your member, and we can see your hoo-ha. I was just more embarrassed seeing the massive turd I was storing on the x-ray when the cute tech handed over my charts. I've worked in fast food, and it's a sad reality that many workers will come to work sick because they can't afford to lose wages. One year, the flu was going around town, and I think our restaurant was ground zero. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Teachers talk crap about students as much as students do about teachers. Don't get me wrong, we love you and we want to see you succeed. But some of you are buttholes. I'm sure most of you know this, but 99.9% of advertisements involving real people is acted and scripted. Even when the people being interviewed are indeed non-actors, they're prompted on what to say. For example, we recently interviewed a guy who won a car from one of our brands. The first round, the interviewer said, "Congrats on your win. How do you feel?" Really great. It's a real surprise, to be honest. Thank you." And then after several rounds and coaching, it went something like this. "Congrats on your win. How do you feel?" "I feel so lucky to have won a insert car brand here. The design and handling is first rate, and I'm most impressed by the fuel consumption. I will definitely keep on holding insert car brand here as my top car of choice." Smile for the camera. As a copywriter, most of the articles you read on the internet are written by us. We have no idea what we're talking about. We get the topic, Google it, and reword other articles into a new one. All we have to do is make sure we include a few SEO words. I've written articles for HVAC companies, movie and TV reviews, tons of different merchandise, sales, and so much other stuff I've forgotten. If it's a blog post online, it's likely fake. There is at least one water bottle or soda can or spray paint can sitting on a piece of blocking behind your drywall somewhere in your house. Some stores that sell used merchandise like video games and movies will pay you money for stolen stuff even when they know it's stolen. It doesn't hurt them to get brand new games that were only released hours ago for a fraction of the cost. Then they turn around and sell them for $5 cheaper than a new copy. They're getting brand new, never opened $60 games for a few bucks and making a huge profit. Scuba instructor. We preach about how important safety is to our students. When we dive for fun and without paying customers in tow, we get up to some very questionable stuff. This is essentially the way almost every dangerous field is, I feel like. I'm the professional. I've been doing this for years. I've accepted all the risks and know exactly how and why this stupid thing I'm doing could kill me. Do not be like me. As a teacher, I can tell you that sometimes we learn something the day before we teach it to you. Biotech produces a lot of waste. The overwhelming majority of international trade is done by incompetent, poorly trained, and uneducated staff from poor countries that are also exploited. Government checks are all corrupt, even from Western countries with generally low corruption. This is by design. It's a miracle that ships don't collide and sink constantly. Again, this is one of those things that should be surprising but isn't. The fact that there are people piloting and guiding vessels with hundreds or thousands of tons of cargo who don't know what the heck they're doing is just yet another of life's ongoing absurdities. Documentary editor here. This varies depending on the content or genre, but documentaries can never be completely true. The ethics of filmmaking is disputed among many theorists. Those who work on documentaries understand that they're almost as fictional as completely made-up stories. Again, this depends on the project, but some common practices like frankenbiting, which means splicing sentences and words to create a different message, used especially in reality TV and really dramatic documentaries, are necessary to make a documentary watchable. There are hundreds of hours of footage, and if you see or hear something in the documentary, the creators wanted you to be exposed to that over a different piece of footage. This can lead to lives being destroyed, whether a person is posed as the enemy or antagonist, or they're displayed in a way that doesn't represent them accurately, which is most, if not all the time. I've had to take mental health days off from working because I became so worried about how these people's lives will be affected by my decisions. Nature documentaries can be harmful as well. You know how lemmings follow each other off cliffs and die? That was all faked in a documentary called White Wilderness by Disney. Lemmings aren't stupid. But this one documentary has made this a commonplace, quote, fact. As far as suggestions for more factual documentaries, I honestly can't say unless I worked on them personally. As an editor, I know things that will never see the light of day, so it would be idiotic of me to say I can tell when something's left out or misconstrued. Suffice to say that you'll never know as much as the editor did, and the editor and directors will never know as much as the actual people involved. One documentary that comes to mind is the documentary Blind Spot, because it's very sparse editing-wise, so it looks like raw footage that an editor would work with to edit into a more sensational film. It's been a while since I've seen it, but I think there's a part where the doc's crew lets her watch the interview and make corrections to what she says. That might be wrong though, it's been a few years. Also, I acknowledge that ums and ahs are edited out, but isn't that still a form of manipulation? I worked on a small doc that was literally just noting inventions in the state, and the amount of editing we had to do just to make the old people watchable was significant, so that they sound completely different on film than they do in real life. I ended up quitting a career because people of all genders and ages kept trying to solicit me for bedroom favors. I'm a young male massage therapist. You can buy stamps from your mailbox. Just leave a note and money and stamps will be there the next day. I don't know if this is a total secret, but a lot of the talking points about how expensive lawyers are or how plaintiffs' lawyers get unreasonably high payouts for doing little work is driven by corporations trying to discourage people from suing them. For example, most plaintiffs' lawyers are working entirely on a contingency basis, meaning that they advance all costs with the risk of no reimbursement and don't see a dime unless they win. And almost all of them will give you a free consultation. But by spreading the false narrative of, it's going to cost you to even talk to a lawyer about that, big companies discourage you from even consulting one and finding out the truth. Similarly, the narrative of plaintiffs' lawyers getting unreasonably high fees for cases is also designed to misrepresent the truth. For example, you hear a big company say, this class action got $2.50 for each person, but the attorneys got $250,000, or something like that. But the only reason the attorneys got all that money is because the company went all in litigating over $2.50, racking up attorneys' fees on both sides, when they could have short-circuited the whole thing from the outset by saying, you got us, here's your money, and paid next to nothing in attorneys' fees. Plus, $2.50 times a million people is a lot of money, meaning that the fees were justified by the total amount recovered, and that the case wasn't so insignificant to begin with. But by controlling the narrative, companies make it seem like it's unreasonable to be mad that they stole millions from consumers, and that it's even more unreasonable for someone whose job it is to take on all the risk and then get paid based on a percentage of what their results are. Sure, there are windfall cases, but usually those cases are needed just to offset the 10 other cases where you took a haircut on fees. It's like putting $100 in a slot machine, losing 10 times, and then hitting one jackpot on your last turn to make back $100, and then having the casino say, he got $100 for a single game of slots? This is ridiculous, until you're forced to give back $90 of what you won. How likely are you going to be to play again? There's a lot more to this, but the long and short of it is that the companies are projecting when they paint lawyers as greedy, and they do so to minimize the chance that they get called on their bullcrap. This is actually an element of truth that I've heard bits and bobs of, but had never really gone all in on looking at the facts. And yes, lawyers, especially up-and-coming ones, take pro bono and contingency cases all the time. It's worth exploring your options. University professor here, we don't actually read your entire answer. Most of us don't. It depends on a lot of factors, and not everyone does it. Service costs are based on how much money you look like you have. I'm a woodworker and contractor for a few other things. I come to your house, you tell me what you want done. My jumping off point is how much the market will bear. If I think you can afford a $4,000 solid oak bookcase, then that's what I'll quote you. I can just make a cheaper version that I make less money on, but why would I do that? It's not that I'm just ripping you off, I'm selling you a better product, but in doing so I make more money. So, when getting a quote, it can pay to be very direct about what you want to spend, or you're going to be sold the most expensive version they think you can afford. The real reason programmers have so many screens on is because one of them always has Google pulled up on it. Nobody knows what they're doing 100% of the time. It's typically always, this should work, or, well, I hope this works. Lots of unethical shipping companies, even today, dump a lot of garbage, oily sludge, waste-contaminated water, and oil out when sailing in international waters far away from the shore. There are only a few hundred players today who are actually executing business trades while still keeping the carbon footprint and environment as one of their core policies. I'm glad to be working with one of them. When I worked for fast food, everyone else there was a ghost hunter. They'd put together special weekends to go to haunted places around the city. Church worker here. This may be specific to the church I work for, but I think what I'm about to say is pretty common for bigger churches. You know, those with like 1,000 or more members. They are two-faced. They'll tell the janitorial crew that janitorial service is truly a ministry and it's so good and so important, but guess what? When the church needs to make a cutback, we're some of the first ones screwed over. We're the ones expected to clean until 2 or 3 a.m. on a Sunday morning after people have used the building until midnight. As a woman, I've had to walk away from some pretty filthy behavior from the guy pretty high up in the church's hierarchy, and no one really has my back about it. There are so many fake, judgmental, hateful people who hide behind the guise of Christianity. People will lock others out of the building and laugh at them. They tell people who aren't dressed presentable enough to sit in the back if that person isn't run off by their frozen, hateful stares. This is so anti what a church and Christianity should be. Those who've adopted older children, what was your experience like? My best friend's family adopted a kid our age when we were in high school. I think he moved in with them around 14 or 15 years of age. He still has a relationship with his biological family, and he doesn't usually refer to his adopted parents as mum and dad. He'll say second mum and second dad, or just use their names. But he does refer to my friend and her brother as siblings. We're all mid to late 20s now, and according to her, it's been really great. My friend and her family are small white people, and he's a really big black guy, so he'll sometimes show pictures of his adoptive parents to people and be like, "This is my mom and dad." And when others comment about him being adopted, he'll pretend he had no idea he was adopted. All in all, it was a great move. He's been able to attend the college of his choice and go into a field of study he wouldn't have otherwise been able to. My parents never adopted him, but when I was 14, we had a 15-year-old boy move in with us who stayed until he was 21. It was very strange for me as a teenage girl to have an older boy, who I'd never met, move into my house, and to see my parents take him in as one of their own. There were suddenly all these rules for me, like I wasn't allowed to wear pajamas around the house or be home alone with him for the first year or so. However, he turned out to be the loveliest kid. While we never really got over the awkwardness and never really bonded, the whole experience was overwhelmingly positive. In particular, my mum became much happier with the fulfillment that she got from the experience, as she'd been struggling to find purpose in her life. He'll never know how much our family improved from having him, and I hope that one day I'll have the chance to tell him. I've 4 adopted siblings, 3 of which were adopted as teens. The first few days were always rough. My brother Chuck got into a fight with my mum and left. He went to a friend's who'd also been putting him up for a bit, but couldn't stay longer than one night. When he got to school, he broke down in the principal's office and they called my mum. She left work and he apologized for the fight and absolutely begged to still be able to live with us. She told him, "Just because you screw up one time, it doesn't mean we're going to give up on you." He moved back in and immediately made my brother and I look bad. He was so grateful just to have a place to stay, food every night, and to feel loved that any chores were the least he could do. My sisters were very similar situations. When my sister Liz crashed my mum's car, she hid at a friend's for like 3 days until my mum convinced her she was allowed to come home. Or when she got pregnant at 16, she couldn't even tell my mum. She just had to nod yes or no while my mum basically played 20 questions. As the years have gone on, all of them have grown into pretty well-rounded people. They've managed to make something of themselves. They definitely have noticeable emotional scars, but they cope as well as anyone. I'm sure that there are some heartbreakers to come in our long line of stories tonight, but it's great to hear that when given an environment of tolerance and forgiveness, people can really shine and grow into well-adjusted adults. Kindness is key, as always. I was adopted. Taken in at 16 and formally adopted at 18. The first couple of days were a little awkward, but it's been an absolute joy. I still have some trouble feeling like a legitimate piece of the family, perhaps because I wasn't adopted when I was really young, but I've been trying to fight that feeling. Family isn't bound by blood, which is why people can get married or find family when theirs has been cut loose or deceased. Nobody should have to be alone in this world. My brother is adopted. He's 11 and turning 12 next week. My dad adopted him after a year of fostering. He's called me his sister since the fostering began. He's the sweetest kid in the world. He never fights, never complains, and never talks back. Gets perfect grades. The situation in which my dad comes to adopt him is a strange one, and I think it has a lot to do with how grateful he is to be a part of our family. I was an only child for 23 years, and I married and moved out of my parents' house years ago. I still love my brother, and I don't think of him any differently than I would any other sibling. We haven't adopted, but we've had foster kids through the years. Uniformly, the older kids walk into the house, find the dogs, and interact with them first. Then they'll ask where the TV is, we don't have one, and they'll express disbelief and disgust that we don't. Then they resume playing with the dogs. The first few days are always really weird because you've invited someone else with an entirely different culture or lifestyle into your home, and you raise them. We find stuff they do a little weird, and they find stuff we do a little weird. 2 brothers we had, 6 and 12, didn't know the names of meals, for example. They called them all lunch. They'd never had meals, they just snacked on whatever they could find through the day. So they called it the lunch that we eat in the morning and the lunch at night. The same brothers also steadfastly refused to wear shirts in the house because, well, they'd never done so. We recently had a chance to talk to the younger one, who's back in care in another part of the state, and we asked him what those first days were like. He told us he was so little and so scared that we'd be mean to him. He was afraid that we'd bully him. He said he was less scared when we had dogs and that he was really glad when we became the parents God gave him. Words from his current foster mum, I think. Then he said he wanted to be a foster parent when he grew up so he could show kids that it's not that bad, and my heart ate my throat, and now we can never stop fostering. When I was 14, a family at our church that was unable to have children of their own decided to adopt a child from Russia. After a long process of paperwork and a ton of fees, they went over to go meet her and bring her home. When they got there, they found out that she had 4 older brothers and sisters living with her in the orphanage. Evidently, the orphanage had no issue splitting them up, but the family friends weren't willing to do that. They did bring her home, but immediately started campaigning at church to get the other 4 children adopted. 3 of the 4 remaining children were adopted within a week or 2, but the oldest child was 16 years old, and nobody wanted to adopt someone that old. At the time, I was 14 years old, and my older blood brother was 18. My parents were convinced that he fit too perfectly within our ages to be able to let him split up from his other brothers and sisters. So, we adopted him. After the same ridiculous amount of paperwork and fees that the first family had had to go through, we were able to get him over to the US. When my parents brought him back, he didn't speak any English and had been smoking cigarettes and working a construction job since he was 12. It definitely took a bit of work to get him to quit smoking and tell him that he had to start high school. The first year was a bit weird. We kept an English to Russian dictionary handy at all times to communicate, and we made a lot of borscht to help him feel at home, which we found out later he hated. He loved computers and playing games and was able to find friends at school very quickly with the same interests, which was great because people who play WoW all the time tend to stay out of trouble. He was actually very smart and able to catch up very quickly in school, but constantly used misunderstanding the language to get away with things. My parents didn't let it slide though. They'd pull out the English to Russian dictionary and lay out how he'd done messed up. They were always sure to not single him out though. When I messed up, they punished me exactly like they punished him, so that he could see it was no different for anyone. Early on, he definitely tried to bully me a bit, but he capped out at 5'5" and I grew to 6'2". So that didn't last long. I always enjoyed video games too, and we were able to start bonding over that as my older blood brother went off to college. Me and him never had a lot to talk about, but would sit quietly and play games. I always kind of thought that we weren't very close, but as time went on, I realized it was just an understanding that we were very different people, but we were there for each other. After a year or so, it was very normal. He was just part of the family. The biggest thing my parents did to make sure it was clear he was part of the family was to make sure that they went to every single activity he was part of. Every track meet, every school function, every church event, they were there and they always dragged me along too. At the time, I hated it, but I realize now that they just wanted to make sure he never questioned whether or not he was part of the family. After high school, he went off to college and graduated, and he's now a successful construction manager who makes way more money than me and isn't afraid to give me crap about it. I mostly see him at family gatherings, which he comes to every single one of by choice. But when we see each other, we immediately pick back up where we left off and try to hit each other in the groin, because he's my brother. Adopted my daughter when she was 14. Every kid is different and comes with their own set of problems. However, all adopted children have attachment and abandonment issues. It was very difficult, but we pulled through, and now she's 20 and doing great. It's very hard, but you gain courage and happiness from the knowledge that you saved a person's life. You can pull them out of loneliness, unhappiness, and living in fear, and give them love and happiness. Nothing else I ever do in my life is going to come close to how good I feel about my wife and I deciding to adopt. If you go for it, look for support. Get the government to help provide you with therapy for the child and yourselves. Learn about attachment and abandonment issues, and the therapies that deal with them. Yeah, I can imagine that the later you get a kid, they've probably been in the foster system for a while, or they've been recently taken away from a less than ideal home situation for a bit. It must be so hard to strike the right balance between loving support and not overwhelming them. Lots of heartwarming stories today. I'm a sibling. My parents adopted twice, one at 7, the other at 12, several years later. We're all over 21 now. I think our family has experienced both ends of the spectrum. Couldn't have been more different experiences. For the 7-year-old, it felt like they'd been with our family all along in a very short time, a matter of months. It was so much fun watching them learn everything you take for granted a little bit, like trips to the swimming hole, seeing a dog, stuff like that. Pretty much a Hallmark movie. The 12-year-old was a much more difficult adjustment. Still had great fun welcoming and getting to know them, but there was a totally reasonable lack of trust that made getting started slower. Obviously, loved them to pieces, but it often felt much more like a Mexican standoff than a honeymoon. There was some major detachment disorder. They never really let one parent in and probably never will. There was lots of lying and manipulation, triangulating family members, just all around very tricky. This is expected. You have to understand that every adult in this person's life has abandoned them. They learned to survive under harsh circumstances. It was very heartbreaking for me to see and understand both sides of a broken relationship. For many years, one parent desperately desiring a healthy relationship with their child, who they love, but also understanding it probably can't happen. There's definitely a chip missing regarding empathy, but you roll with it and love them anyway. I know it was incredibly taxing on both parents and the child, but ultimately they had a safe place to grow and learn, and that's the job. Good vibes are a secondary luxury. Adoption is very beautiful, but it can also be earth-shatteringly difficult. I have a lot of respect for adoptive parents. Parenting is already difficult without modifiers. It's been beautiful for our family, and also very difficult sometimes. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. We adopted an almost 15-year-old through international adoption. Without going into too much detail, there was some pretty extreme neglect, trauma, and a hostile situation growing up. We were his first actual family setting. The first year and a half was, to put it mildly, hell. We were the worst-case scenario story they warn you could happen during your adoption classes. Violent outbursts several times a week, thankfully directed only at me. If they'd been towards our other kiddo, this would have been a different story. Multiple screaming, throw-down tantrums daily, several personal hygiene issues, food hoarding, extreme anxiety and hyper-awareness, horrendous trauma-based phobias of the dark, loud noises, small spaces, dogs, certain foods, rope and fire, stuff like that. The only places he felt safe enough to relax were public areas with a lot of people around. Anytime you were one-on-one with him, he was on alert. We took him to therapy, all the therapy, sometimes 2 or 3 times per week. We took our other kid to therapy to make sure he was doing okay during all of this and put measures in place to keep him safe. We went to our own therapy and education sessions to make sure we were being as effective on the parenting front as possible and to deal with the second-hand trauma from the stories our son began sharing with us as he started to trust us more. We converted our bedroom into a safe room and packed up any household item that had personal significance and put it in storage. We set up an emergency call system so that we could have someone else over anytime he had a violent episode, as he would immediately calm down if there was a witness. We enrolled him in a class to help him learn social and life skills, and we took him to karate class, which given the violence seemed like a terrible idea to a lot of people, to help him learn to feel more safe and in control of himself. We got him onto medication for his anxiety, which helped tremendously. About a year in, something clicked for him. I think maybe he realized that we weren't going to bully or reject him and that it was okay to let us in. He'd spent a lot of time trying to drive us away to protect himself. If he didn't care about our family, he wouldn't hurt us as badly if we, in his words, threw him away. Spaces between outbursts started getting longer. The food hoarding, stealing, and personal hygiene issues disappeared. He started to take on more personal responsibility. He began participating in family activities and wanted to spend time with us. It's been nothing short of breathtaking watching him change and grow. We're nearly 6 years in now. Our son no longer has violent outbursts or tantrums. All grandma's antiques are back on the mantel. His phobias, while not completely gone, are far more manageable. Our goals for him have gone from keep him away from crime and out of jail to help him live independently and pursue his personal goals. He asked to change his name so he could be named after his adoptive dad, and he changed his last name to ours. I get handmade cards for my birthday, and sometimes he gives me hugs, just because. Parenting isn't supposed to come with prizes, but that first, "I love you, Mum," was perhaps the greatest gift I've ever been given. Sometimes he tells me, I had bad things happen to me in the past, and I can't change that, but they can't make me do things. I get to choose my future. He's a pretty incredible person, and we're so proud of the young man he's become. I adopted 2 daughters when they were 7 and 10 from foster care. They came from a horrific home. They were both severely traumatized. First, going from no kids to a single, in my case, mom of 2 very broken children is not for the faint of heart. You need a very good, understanding support system. Second, you need to have your own therapy sessions. It's incredibly helpful to vent to a professional who deals with the emotionally damaged children as a profession. And third, they'll have issues for a long time. And there's no quick fix. Even if their birth homes weren't super traumatic, you have to remember they lost everything. Their parents, grandparents, friends, teachers, classmates, neighbors, pets, toys, home, and clothes. Just imagine everyone and everything you've ever cared about and have ever known being loaded onto an airplane and crashed into the ocean, gone forever. That's what they have to deal with. The scars last a lifetime. Fourth, make sure their teachers, daycare providers, new family members, and parents of their friends know what they're going through. The way emotionally damaged children act out can really catch people off guard if they're not expecting it. Give them tips on how to handle it if possible. Fifth, remind them over and over it's okay to be sad, angry, scared, and hurt, and whatever else they need. It's important for them to feel it's okay to feel this way. Sixth, many times the child keeps their emotions bottled up so they can feel certain they're safe. A lot of the time, they don't feel safe until the adoption is done, and they're sure that they're not going back. This is when the years of pent-up anger, fear, anxiety and stuff comes out. It can be really rough, so be ready. Remember they're doing this because they feel safe with you. They formed a bond with you. 7th, give them as much choice as possible. Victims of a problematic upbringing suffer greatly from having their sense of control taken away. Do you want your glass filled with milk this high or this high? Do you want to go to bed at 8:20 or 8:30? Do you want bubbles in your bath or not? They sound small, but every time they get to make a choice, they gain a little bit of control back. It adds up over time. And 8th, through a million, tell them you love them and nothing they can do will ever make you stop. They will test this a lot. Mine are 15 and 18 now. It's been a rough road, but I couldn't imagine my life without them. We adopted our 2 boys out of foster care when they were 4 and 5. Not necessarily older, but it's older than's typical, I can tell you. They were in a bad place in their foster home, emotionally and physically, but that separation still took its toll. First, understanding it's a bit jarring to have no kids one day, and the next you have 2 who are fully dependent on you. It's obvious, but still nothing you can be prepared for. Next, know that if they come from a bad place, they're going to be sure you're bad as well. They'll be convinced no matter how nice you are, you'll do something awful as well. They'll test you. They'll misbehave to test you. They'll conspire to test you. But persistence will make a difference. You'll get frustrated, but the rewards of giving these kids a stable, loving home will never ever be replaced. It's been 10 years since we adopted them, and they're my best friends. We've seen them through so much, and while I certainly haven't been a perfect parent, I'm proud I've provided them a path and future they likely wouldn't have had otherwise, due to no fault of their own. Yep, and all I've been able to think about this entire time is how hard it would be to consistently be a good role model, whilst also being put through a very trying situation yourself, and I'm not sure I could. But I suppose no parent is perfect, and as long as you're doing your best and providing love and effort, then it counts for something. Wow. I adopted my daughter when she was 8. She's 13 now. She's a pretty easy person to get along with, so we didn't have any of the horror stories you read about. However, certain challenges were inevitable. She and I are very different people, and her temperament, and maybe her personality, were already pretty fully formed when she moved in. So while my son, adopted at age 3, and I can talk about things like politics, my daughter is just not interested in conversations that may lead to disagreements. This is just one example of a challenge where we recognize the difference in one another, and it took a while to figure out how to be a close mother or daughter in spite of these differences. Probably the biggest thing, though, is if you adopt an older child, you've got to recognize and respect that their loyalty will always be divided, and that's okay. I know she loves her bio mum, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I know that she feels divided between her old life and her new one, and my goal is to make that division as easy as possible for her. So, what's it like? Challenging. Less so for me than many other people because my daughter was fairly easy and I'm pretty flexible. And is it worth it? Hell yes. Little things that seem routine for you might not be routine for them. Kids just don't know because of a different way of doing things that was the way of life for them for 8 years. An example is teeth brushing. My kid's birth parents just didn't teach her how to properly brush her teeth. She just kind of chewed on the brush and didn't rinse her mouth out when she was done. I can speak from the other side of being the adoptee. I was adopted along with my biological little sister from Korea to the same parents in the States. I've always lived with the idea that one can choose their own family. It wasn't something merely given to you. Our parents were amazing, loving, dedicated people, and it only took a few days for our relationship to be the same as if I were their biological son for the last 6 years. Off the bat, I was calling my new parents Mum and Dad, while they called me son. My sister, on the other hand, took a long time to come around. She really struggled with her identity, being Korean, and having to adjust to an American home. She was really caught up with wondering if life could have been better if she was back in Korea, and if there was a more special bond between blood-related parents. That, along with the fact that we grew up in a fairly conservative, almost completely Caucasian area, we'd receive insensitive comments regularly. I think she felt very out of place. She'd often lash out at our parents and would claim if they were her real parents, they would have never done this or that. To this day, she calls our parents by their first names as a remnant of her rebellion. I think our parents have handled it well. They always supported her and realized that even with all the love they gave her, she'd need to figure it out on her own. It took her about 11 years until she turned 16 to figure things out and finally accept who she was. We'd always get odd stares as a family, since we look extremely different from our Jewish parents, but our parents cared for us, obviously much more than our biological parents did, and we should appreciate the opportunity of having a loving family that we've been given. I adopted a 16-year-old and have fostered 8 other children over the years. She's 23 now and thankfully still very much a part of our family. First, every child is different. There's no one way that it will go, and they all react in different ways. Second, plan on the first weeks, months, and even year to be relationship building, and it will take time. Invest in building the relationship and laying a loving and trusting foundation. There'll be friction, especially with older children, as they're used to doing things differently, and likely have a more fully developed worldview that may be significantly different than yours. Overall, my approach is, leaving out a ton of details, first identifying things they like about themselves and show appreciation for those traits. Then demonstrate that you care and will take the time to listen to them and really understand their thoughts and perspectives. And finally, do research to set up appropriate boundaries and evolve them as the relationship deepens. This is especially important if they've had trauma in the past. Old school gamers, what will the new gamers of today never experience? Having to decide what saves to delete because you can't afford a new memory card. Oh lord, I still remember when memory cards first became a thing and I had no idea about them. I'd rented a PlayStation 1, Final Fantasy VII, and Resident Evil 2. Cut to me realizing my predicament and playing Resident Evil 2 all the way through to the alligator before dying. My god, that was awful. Remember in fighting games how unlocking characters was usually fun and unorthodox with different tasks you had to do to unlock them? You don't see that as much today. Having no idea what you're supposed to do next in a game. There were moments in old games where you just ran around for ages trying to figure out if you had missed something or if it was a bug. Now you just Google or YouTube it. Not to mention there are many in-game guides to doing things such as quest markers. Going back to every town and talking to every NPC hoping to jumpstart the story again was real back in the day. Putting the goddamn disc in and playing the game immediately after. Even better, plugging the cartridge in and playing even more immediately after. Actually, one company never left the system. Nintendo's always had at least one cartridge system active on the market since the NES. The awe and astonishment of the huge leaps in graphics. I still remember talking with my friends at school about how Final Fantasy X was basically indistinguishable from real life. I remember watching the first Halo trailer on the GameStar CD and I was just blown away. Could graphics ever get better than that? Going to the Scholastic Book Fair and buying a cheat code book or a strategy guide. Networking with my friends on how to get through challenging areas instead of looking it up on YouTube. 100% of my childhood friendships were forged around trading video game tips and sharing Nintendo Power Maps. I remember a kid in elementary school wanted me to pay him for directions on how to get some item in Super Mario RPG. I wouldn't pay him, but his little brother told me for free later that day, so all was well. LAN parties, man. I'm not going too far back, but LAN parties were a huge part of the scene back in the early noughties. In my city, they're basically dead now. Sitting in the back seat, poring over the game manual for the game you just bought as your parents drive you home from the store. You only did that in the back seat? The narrator basically just read all of his game manuals whenever his parents booted him off the computer. Those thick Blizzard ones with all the lore and unit descriptions honestly got some reading time even when the PC was fully available. Old school manuals really effed, man. I miss being that excited about a game book. A crowd of people standing around a new fighting game at the arcade with a line of quarters on the screen serving as the cue for challenges. Winner stays. Honestly, arcade games in general. I remember playing the old Gauntlet Dark Legacy game, a game which certainly devoured quarters, but at a mostly fair rate. My brother actually went to the local arcade and played so frequently that he eventually beat the game, which gave you a code to send in for the chance to win a t-shirt that said, "I crushed Garm," the game's final boss. I don't think I've ever really seen anything like that in the modern era of video games. Arcade gaming was great, like that desperation of being down to your last couple of quarters and patrolling the arcade to get the best gaming experience, to round out your day before you ran out of cash. Blowing on the cartridge to fix it. Yeah, and blowing on it wasn't even what fixed it. Taking the game out and putting it back in was. In-person multiplayer. No need to buy 4 copies of a system and a game in order to play with friends. I thought it was going to make a comeback with 3D TVs. MotorStorm on PlayStation 3 allowed 2 players to play together, but each got the entire screen. Instead of having 3D glasses with left eye and right eye lens, you'd get 2 sets of glasses. One would have 2 left eye lenses and the other would have 2 right eye lenses. It allowed 2 images to display on screen at once, but the pair of glasses you were wearing would dictate who saw what. Mapping out dungeons by hand on graph paper and using a spiral notebook as a do-it-yourself quest journal. Dialing into a BBS to play BRE and ISA versus people that live in another state. lugging your PC to your friend's house and gaming via a null modem cable, copy protection code wheels. Switching to channel 2, I believe it was, in order to play games. Screwing the adapter onto the back of the TV to be able to screw in the coax cable from the NES. Saving your game at the worst time and having to start the whole frickin' thing over. When you put quick save and quick load next to each other on the keyboard and press the wrong one as you're falling into a pit of radioactive goo in Half-Life. Genuine surprises and mysteries. Obviously, there's occasionally one that comes through, like GTA or weird unfound Dark Souls stuff, but most everything has its code decompiled and secret assets located eventually. I'm thinking particularly of the hunt for the Triforce in Ocarina of Time. There was some Brazilian girl who was sending what turned out to be fake screenshots of supposedly finding the Triforce. Big long hullabaloo turned out to be fake, but it sucked up so many hours of my young life trying to replicate. The golden age of MMOs, especially Mamorpagas. Back in the noughties, they felt like role-playing games in a world full of other players. Take World of Warcraft as an example. No microtransactions, no easy ways to success, everything had to be worked for in that game, and the satisfaction you got from achieving something was insane. You actively reached out to other players in the community because playing alone in World of Warcraft up until Cataclysm was absolutely impossible. You had your go-to people you'd hit up for dungeons or group quests. Yes, those once existed. Elite mobs, anyone? Or even raids. Nowadays, you just queue up for everything with a single click, which isn't necessarily bad. It's a great quality of life thing, but it effectively killed the world in World of Warcraft. You can sit in a town and just do most stuff from there without stepping outside of it. A lot of Mamorpagas sacrificed the community feel and world for quality of life and accessibility, but that's the case for most games nowadays. Quick rewards everywhere to satisfy the player base and keep them playing. Well, data mining and immediate access to information also contributed heavily to the decline. So much in EverQuest and early World of Warcraft was unknown that made the experience genuinely thrilling. Nowadays, everything's out there already, and people in the beta branch just post sims of the new top-performing specs. That's one thing I do miss. You'd be geared up as humanely possible before a raid dungeon, and it would be months before anyone managed to figure out how to kill that boss. Even with a non-MMO such as Diablo 3, I remember it taking a few months of nerfs before most people completed Inferno difficulty. Big box PC games. They were a little bit larger than a ream of printer paper, but there was so much room for artwork showcasing the game outside and inside the box, not to mention a thick manual or two and extra artwork that came inside. I think it was a holdover from when software shipped on floppy disks. Over time, more games came out on optical disks, which meant that there was more than enough space to store a digital online manual. As a consequence, boxes shrank, and those full physical manuals became booklets, which later became instruction cards. Now, even those are being phased out in favor of digital downloads. Oh man, the narrator misses those big chunky box boys so much. These days, every now and again you see collector's editions, but not really so much for PC games. I miss having big books and prima strategy guides included in some of those. It was truly the most exciting thing a teen could waste their awful service job money on. We are losing local couch co-op more and more with new games. Oddly enough, there are lots of small-budget local co-op games on PC these days. I don't know anyone to play them with, though. Everyone's too busy with stupid stuff like raising their kids or working overtime. Playground rumors. I barely experienced this since I was born in '96, so Google was around and popular for most of my gaming childhood. But there was a time where a friend would tell you something like, "I heard that if you use strength on the truck you can catch a Mew," or "I heard there's a way to get a glitch Pokemon that lets you get infinite Master Balls," and you had no easy way to verify that except to try it yourself. Now, if someone says, "I heard that there's actually a 4th Pikachu evolution after Raichu," you can just Google it and data miners have already conclusively proven if it's true or false. Having to write down the code to skip to that level because I couldn't save the game. Changing the channel to channel 3, or video. I still love the Hideo joke during the Psycho Mantis fight. You losing your game because someone answered the house phone. PvP games are just meant to be fun. Everything has to be an esport these days, and that attracts the super toxic crowd of hardcore gamers or whatever. Not sure if this is true, but as someone who mostly plays competitive online games, overcoming imbalances. I used to play Star Wars Brood War a bunch, and it received very little if any balance patches over the years. Balance patches really weren't so much of a thing. So instead of the main attitude being, X is overpowered, wait until it's nerfed, the main attitude seemed to be, how do we beat it anyway? And genuinely, generally seem to work out. Now, every time someone gets destroyed by something, there's a yell of imbalance, and that's where it ends. No try to beat it, no further thought. Game's imbalanced, that's it. The lives system. You lose them all? Start over, motherfricker. Non-backlit Game Boy screens. That panic when the sun starts setting just as you were about to start a boss battle with Lieutenant Surge, and also the painstakingly slow progress as you wait to pass street lamps and hold your Game Boy up to the window to see what you're doing. Putting AA batteries in the freezer just to get a few more minutes on Tetris. Getting a new game, specifically at Toys R Us. Back in the day, you pulled a slip from the game area and paid for that. Then after you paid, you brought the slip to another counter where they gave you the game. It was such a ritual. Also, spending 2 hours arguing with your brother at Blockbuster about what video game to rent. An almost toxicity-free community. I don't remember the last online game with a player base that wasn't filled with spoiled children. Games are amazing now. When we were kids, we'd crap our pants playing just about anything that's out for current consoles or PC. Yet the modern gaming community is negative and toxic about 95% of all games that come out. Basically, if it's not a Zelda game or the current indie side-scroller, be prepared to read negative reviews. I mean, not for nothing, but the Bloodborne Reddit is the kindest, most helpful community of juntas ever. You can't swing a dead Yarnamite without hitting someone who's offering to log in to help someone with a boss. Even if you don't like the game or haven't played, go lurk and see. We're all the kindest blood-drunk monster juntas around. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. The single-player golden age. It's all player versus player or socially driven group PvE games like Destiny and The Division. The age before 20 DLC packs and in-game microtransactions were the norm, and an expansion pack was something you got at the store and pretty much doubled the game content with. Text only. Game Genie. How has this not been mentioned yet? It's preloaded with cheats and game alterations, you plug your game into it, then plug it into the console. When the game goes to boot, the Game Genie menu comes up first and you can give yourself any number of cheats. Infinite lives, max hearts, level skips, stuff like that. An entire day of split screening with your friends, pizza included. Your file is corrupted. Format memory card? Your couch is broken. Burn your house down? Game guides used to be written on slices of dead tree instead of a wiki. Those grid-based passwords from Mega Man. Installing the original World of Warcraft and hoping you got lucky and the installation would be complete before bedtime. Tomorrow. Editing config sys and autoexec bat files in order to get the correct values for extended memory and expanded memory so your game would even load. I came here to complain about this. There were some games I never even got to run despite fiddling with config files for hours. I haven't played Sonic 3 in a while, let's pop that bad boy in. Insert card into system for the first time in 8 years. Sega. And no fricking updates! I can do you one better than this example. In 2015, my friend and I randomly started reminiscing about Star Wars Rogue Squadron. He then proceeds to dig out his Nintendo 64 from his closet, dusts it off, and we get to zooming around blasting TIE fighters 17 frickin' years after the release of the game, and it starts instantly, working perfectly. I love some of our modern gaming innovations, and they'd be impossible without internet connections and patches, but that experience made me a little bitter about updating consoles these days. Did you know there was a sequel to that old alien creation game Spore called Darkspore? It was basically Spore but a dungeon crawler, straight up Diablo. Did you know the maps for Need for Speed Carbon and Need for Speed Most Wanted were actually combined once in Need for Speed World? The game had full day and night cycles, making it the only way to experience Carbon at daylight or Most Wanted at night. Did you know Fear once had a strictly multiplayer game, Fear Online, which was released after the third Fear game but used the Fear 2 engine? People said it was horrendous, but if you're like me, just trying to make another Fear game on a classic engine no less after the mess that was Fear 3R is a very large leap in the right direction. Do any of these games sound fun or interesting to you? Something you might consider playing or at least checking out for a couple of minutes? Well, F you can't. They're frickin' dead. I don't mean dead in that nobody plays them anymore, I mean dead as in nobody can play them anymore. Every single one of these games required you to connect to a central online publisher-run server, and now that publisher shut down the server, you can't even load past the main menu. None of you will ever know what it's like to play these games, and too frickin' bad. It doesn't stop there. Battleforge, Hawken, Ghost in the Shell, FIFA 14, Madden 13, Battlefield 2 multiplayer, and many more. But that's just off the top of my head for now. Every single one of these games is dead permanently. You want to start up a match on a private server with some old buddies and relive your glory days? F you can't. Why is this okay? Most of these were full-priced $60 games when they came out. They weren't small nothings, not tiny mobile games that offer little to the world of gaming, and are meant to be disposable anyway. I will bet anyone real-world money that a good amount of parents brought FIFA 14 for their kid, expecting to be able to have some good clean fun with their kid for years, and now that the server is down, the parent can go F themselves. There's no excuse for this bullcrap games as a service model, if you even want to try to defend it by calling it that. Because when you're holding a literal hard copy of the game on the disc, you're holding every single piece of data you need for the game, except for the license to play it part. Now, sure, publishers have a bottom line, they can't keep a central server running forever. That would be an acceptable excuse for killing games if there was no other option, which there fricking is. How many games can you name where you can host a private server for everyone to play on, no central authentication required? Off the top of my head, I can think of DayZ and Minecraft, to name a few big-ticket games. It doesn't matter if it's 500 years from now. If people still own copies of Minecraft and the requisite hardware, they'll be able to pop that stuff in and play online. Meanwhile, most of you will never be able to experience Spore's sequel, which is a single-player game no less, because some publisher couldn't give two craps about patching the game, or even releasing the source code so the game's fans could patch it in, and they decided killing their IP was their best option. No gambling. I don't remember any game that had those luck-spinning machines with real-life money. Also, the only time you'd be paying money is when you bought the game, some kind of membership or in some games, currency. Also, internet bills. Getting games in cereal boxes. Actual games. Does anyone remember the series released by Disney when Treasure Planet was coming out? I still have the Asteroid game somewhere. So you have this epic game that you're so excited about and you're getting into it. You've got a real good feel for the stuff. But you're 2 hours into the storyline and you have to stop progress so you can load another disc. It really takes away from the in-the-moment feel that we all take for granted nowadays. For example, imagine playing Geralt in The Witcher. You're jazzed, pumped up, and on the move to tackle a huge storyline. You walk up to the building you're supposed to enter for an encounter, but the screen times out and goes black, then grey, then a DOS screen. You listen to your computer hum, chirp, and crackle, then have to wait 2 or 3 minutes for a load screen. Load screen finally shows up, and then it tells you, insert disk 2. So you eject the disk, maybe your computer has trouble with that, maybe not, and you insert disk 2. The computer loads, and then it thinks, and thinks, and thinks so hard, then the machine makes a loud jerking noise, then quiet. To continue, press enter, and frustratingly you make your way back to your scenario. For maybe 10 minutes you've been removed from the game. You work another hour into the storyline and then you get another pause. Insert disk 3. Oh boy. So the narrator has looked at how much space The Witcher 3 takes up on his hard drive, and I think it would be about, let's see, 85 or so optical CD-ROMs to put all the game files on? Or maybe 11 or 12 DVD-ROMs. But that's an apple to oranges comparison, I guess, since none of those disks have enough space to even run the game engine in the first place. You just wouldn't release The Witcher 3 back then. Going to the shop to buy your games. Getting that game you really wanted and it comes in a big box with fancy graphics, and maybe if it was a big game, there'd be more than one install CD. Wow. Seriously though, I bought RimWorld the other day and I thought, dang, wish I could have this in the proper cardboard game box. It just looks like such a hard copy cover design for a box. Buying a new game and getting a full game, not some of it with the rest paywalled. The Nintendo Hotline. In 4th grade, I was playing Final Fantasy VII, and I'd pilfered the method for breeding a gold chocobo from somewhere and handwritten it down in 4th grade chicken scratch hieroglyphs. Much to my dismay, I never came out with a gold chocobo. So I'm at school one day and Tim, I didn't even like Tim, he was pretty snot-nosed, he was babbling about how his older brother can get a gold chocobo 100% of the time. Curious, I thought to myself. How could anybody have the knowledge, skill, and patience to do such a thing? I needed to know more, so I picked Tim's brain a little bit, and it was clear he didn't know any more than I did. So I asked if I could come and spend the night at his house. I spent the night at Tim's house, who I didn't like, so I could have his brother show me how to breed a gold chocobo. Nowadays, I'd just YouTube and be done with it. Play by mail, when lag was a few days delay due to a snowstorm. World of Warcraft's game launcher. Also, curse client. Loading a game on the Spectrum ZX using a cassette tape. Blasting away at Defender with a crowd of fellow teens gathered around you at the arcade as you raked up impossible scores. The boys whisper, the girls swoon, your focus is at 300%. You can't screw up now. The game is throwing everything at you. You dodge this way, that way, putting your entire body into it. The crowd gets bigger and bigger as newcomers realize something historic and epic is happening on that corner. They don't know who you are. They just know that you're a sorcerer, a Valkyrie, a digital warrior, the walking dude, the Punisher, the Saint, the Equalizer, Darth motherfrickin' Vader for Pete's sake. Where did you come from? Are you even human? For 10 minutes, you're a real-life hero. When you pay $60 for a game, it comes in a nice case and has a user manual like a school textbook, a poster-sized map of the game world for you to tack up on your wall, and now you pay $60 for half a game and you don't even really own it. Having to jot down passcodes to continue in games like Metroid or Kid Icarus because no save files. For things like Metroid and maybe the original Legend of Zelda specifically, having to scribble down crude maps of every area on paper so you don't get lost every 44 seconds. Good old CRT monitors. That thing in 2D fighter games where you walk off one side of the screen and appear on the other. Being stuck on a level or mission for days, internet access has made playthroughs incredibly easy. Burning their eyes playing arcade machines that work with coins, plus needing the skills to avoid paying for a credit and 3 extra lives. Having multiple autoexec.bat and config.sys setups, each tailored to a specific game. Video games at Blockbuster Video. The epiphany of up, up, down, down, left, right, BA, start. Funkoland. Dying of dysentery along the trail. How to beat a game like Morrowind without an internet guide. You can't sell a sense of pride and accomplishment like that. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.